Chapter 6:13. The drastic change in the county did not affect the people in the mountains. If there was any change, it would be Fat Dragon and Poplar Fruit, who smiled knowingly after putting down the phone. Xiongkahu was much more impatient than Poplar Fruit. He had called 2 elders from the nearby Hong villages over the previous day and had a meeting that lasted less than half an hour before they reached a consensus. The other 2 Hong villages had no reason to object to Xiongkahu's suggestion of providing manpower to rebuild the school. It had nothing to do with Xiongkahu's reputation. On one hand, it was because the Xiong village was the location for the school. It was the closest to the other Hong villages and had the most people. On the other hand, Poplar Fruit, who was a foreign Han, had paid for all the expenses. He had spent so much effort to make sure that his child could attend school. All he did was contribute some manpower. It would be unreasonable for him to be calculative. Hence, he saw the bustling scene in the Xiong village that day. Although the 3 Hong villages were rather remote, they had to earn their own living most of the time. Hence, there were many capable people. The school's redesign was done by an elder from another Hong village called Teng Chi. Teng Chi was a surname of the Miao people. Their own Han surname was He. This master, he looked like a farmer. His skin was dark, and he was wearing a straw hat. But in fact, he had a great background. Back when Xiongkahu joined the army, he responded to the call and followed him. However, he was not as skilled in martial arts as Xiongkahu was. He was just a mountain man with slightly better stamina. Hence, the army that master he joined was a basic one. The class he was in was called the civil engineering class, which was commonly known as the engineers. Since they were engineers, they did not charge into enemy lines. They moved with the army and were responsible for burying mines, clearing mines, and building houses. They built simple and hidden command posts. It was at that time that Master he learned some civil engineering skills. After retiring from the army, Master he did not live in seclusion like Xiongkahu. He stayed in the big cities to make a living. He set up a construction team and built houses in several big cities in Guishan province. It was said that his greatest achievement was building the tallest 18-story building in Liupan at that time. Most of the blueprints were drawn by himself. From the time he entered the army, he knew nothing about them. Later on, he could easily draw them. Grandpa he had put in a lot of effort in this aspect. Unfortunately, the business world was cruel. Master he was cheated by his partner, who took away all the money from the construction team. In the end, Master he sold his house to pay the workers and returned to the Hong village disheartened. He never thought of leaving the mountain again. Although he didn't go out of the mountain again, Grandpa he was still a big authority in the area of building houses. After he returned, he pondered over the design concept of tall buildings. Later on, when he designed houses for a few people in the stronghold, the tall buildings incorporated a modern architectural style and were quite popular with the villagers. The original school was designed by Grandpa He. Now, after listening to Poplar Fruit's request, he redrew the design and finally came up with a modified plan. The original school didn't need to be rebuilt. They only needed to tear down a few non-load-bearing walls and replace them with new ones. This greatly reduced the amount of work needed to rebuild the school and saved a lot of money. Cement and bricks had to be bought from the city and were given to Xiongjijiu at the foot of the mountain. As for the other wood, it was simple. They lived in the forest and could get everything locally. The bustle in the stronghold these 2 days was the noise of the 3 Miao men going deep into the mountains to cut down trees and bamboo and then bringing them back. Poplar Fruit was naturally involved. Although he was now a scholar, he used to be a village boy. It wasn't like he had never done dirty work. Seeing that everyone was working in full swing, Poplar Fruit rolled up his sleeves and rushed forward, ignoring Zheng Yujie's objection. Poplar Fruit wasn't very good at cutting down trees, but he helped carry them back. Poplar Fruit's strength came in handy. Generally speaking, a tree trunk with branches cut off, although it was only as thick as a calf, could only be moved by 3 people at the front, middle, and back. They also had to rest a few times along the way. On the other hand, Yanguo carried the trunk and walked forward alone. He didn't do it in a relaxed manner, but he wasn't tired to the point where he was out of breath. He carried the trunk back to the stronghold, and on the way, he still had the energy to greet his daughter. "Kiki, look at Daddy, isn't Daddy awesome?" Poplar Fruit said with a smile. Kiki stood in the circle of friends. It wasn't easy for her to see through the cover of a few leaves that the tall man who was holding a tree and whose clothes were cut in several places was her dearest father. She cried out in surprise and ran to her father's side with small steps. "Papa is awesome." Her small mouth was round. She wanted to laugh excitedly, but she also wanted to show her surprise when she saw Lu Jishan uproot the weeping willow. Anyway, she looked like a little goldfish, so cute. "Kiki, come here." "Ignore him." Zheng Yujie was still angry because Poplar Fruit didn't listen to her advice. At this time, Poplar Fruit looked very manly. The rolled-up short sleeves and the white t-shirt that was cut by the branches on his abdomen revealed a different side of Poplar Fruit, who was usually weak and scholarly. His sweaty and strong abdominal muscles were more explosive than those of a pure gym muscle man. However, Zheng Yujie turned a blind eye to it. She was panting with anger. She always felt that Poplar Fruit shouldn't ignore his identity and run to carry bricks like a migrant worker. What was this? "No. Kiki wants to help Papa move the tree." Kiki's voice was clear, but her momentum was soft and very pleasant to the ears. She moved closer to Poplar Fruit, regardless of whether her father had the time to talk to her. Poplar Fruit really didn't have a free hand. Although he could carry the tree trunk, it was a bit difficult. If he wanted to hold the tree trunk with one hand, it would be better for him to break the world record of weightlifting. Poplar Fruit was just an ordinary person who was stronger than ordinary people. "Hey, Kiki, be careful. Don't get poked in the eyes." Poplar Fruit quickly stood still while holding the tree and didn't dare to move. Chichi walked recklessly to the back and hugged one of the hanging tree trunks. She tried to exert her strength, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't move this huge thing. Poplar Fruit really didn't want to spoil his daughter's mood, and also didn't want to pour cold water on his daughter who was kind to help. He could only half squat and strictly control the strength of his hand, giving Kiki the feeling that she was also using all her strength. Poplar Fruit was still shouting, "Kiki, pay attention. Tilt your head back a little bit. Slowly, let's take a step forward. 1, 2, 1. The excitement on Kiki's face didn't diminish. She also hugged the tree and shouted 1, 2, 1 with her father. Poplar Fruit was actually more tired like this. However, tiredness was nothing. He also enjoyed it. Chapter 614. Zheng Yujie had a quarrel with Poplar Fruit. Was it really just because of Poplar Fruit's incessant persuasion? Queen Zheng was not that narrow-minded. Poplar Fruit ran into the deep mountains without any regard for his own safety and came back in ragged clothes. That was just an excuse for Zheng Yujie's outburst. The real reason why Zheng Yujie had been suppressing her anger for days was that she was going back to the capital. This time, no one forced her to go back to the capital. Although her family complained about her leaving without saying goodbye, they didn't ask her to go back. Zheng Yujie had no choice but to go back. A few days ago, she had discussed with Poplar Fruit about setting up a publishing house that belonged to her, or to Zheng Yujie and herself, at least, that was how Zheng Yujie saw it. Later, Zheng Yujie had discussed with Poplar Fruit a few more times. After that, they had more or less settled on this plan. Now that she had a plan, Zheng Yujie started to make preparations without stopping. Putting aside the market research and the selection of the publishing house that she was about to acquire, she also needed to make preparations for leaving Dongshin Publishing. She had nothing to miss about Dongshin Publishing. Launching the translation of Poplar Fruit's novel, Young School, into the market was her last stand. In addition, Zheng Yujie also planned to persuade some of her key editors to leave with her. On this point, Zheng Yujie wasn't worried that Dongshin Publishing would take revenge on her. On one hand, the focus of their business would be different in the future. On the other hand, Dongshin Publishing didn't dare to do anything to Zheng Mingsheng's daughter and Zheng Jianhua's granddaughter. Dongshin Publishing was a state-owned enterprise. Losing a few people would be a loss to the country. They didn't need to make things difficult for the Zheng family. On the other hand, Zheng Yujie had to communicate with the chief editor, Pang Yu. Pang Yu was her elder and also her mother's good friend. From another point of view, He was also Zheng Yujie's guide in this line. Pang Yu wouldn't stop Zheng Yujie from developing her career, but Zheng Yujie didn't want to leave any grudges in Aunt Pang Yu's heart. In addition to dealing with the publishing house, Zheng Yujie also planned to negotiate with several online literature websites that owned a large number of copyrights. Now that the foreign language copyrights of those websites were cheap, Zheng Yujie would take the opportunity to get all of them. Of course, this matter wouldn't be as simple as it seemed. They didn't think that the copyrights were worth much. However, if you really wanted to buy all of them at a cheap price, you might arouse their vigilance. Then, they might not sell the copyrights and wait for the best price. That was possible. However, Zheng Yujie had other plans. She would negotiate with them first and buy them at a reasonable price. If they deliberately raised the price, Zheng Yujie wouldn't mind using the power behind her to compete with them. Zheng Yujie had no choice but to return. As for her, she had only reunited with Yang Guo for a few days, and then they had to part. Afterwards, she wouldn't be able to see Yang Guo for a few months. She was very reluctant to part, but she couldn't say it out loud. The reason for this was very complicated. On one hand, Zheng Yujie had a strong personality. It would be better to kill her if she cried because of love. On the other hand, she felt that she didn't have the status to vent her reluctance. Yes, she and Poplar Fruit were just close friends. She wasn't like the girl who secretly talked to Poplar Fruit on the phone at night. She could act coquettishly and even throw a tantrum at Poplar Fruit unscrupulously. This kind of emotion was even more intense, especially when Poplar Fruit was unwilling to do some very intimate and ambiguous interactions with her recently. Although Poplar Fruit carefully took her feelings into consideration, Zheng Yujie still faintly felt that Poplar Fruit was keeping a distance from her. From the beginning, she was mentally prepared. Zheng Yujie kept telling herself not to mind. She gritted her teeth and swore that even if he walked with another woman, she would persist. She would use her actions to make Poplar Fruit fall in love with her. Yes, Zheng Yujie had always believed that she and Poplar Fruit would have a happy day. This kind of thinking was very rare in this impetuous society. Not to mention a girl like Zheng Yujie, who came from an extraordinary family. Even a girl from an ordinary family would have her own dignity and reserve. Who would be like Zheng Yujie, who persevered for a man who had already fallen in love with another woman? Duan Xueqing wouldn't. After she understood that it was impossible for her and Poplar Fruit to be together, she rationally left Poplar Fruit. She didn't want to wait for more than 4 years like before. She also didn't want to be drowned in heartache like a tide. Perhaps leaving would hurt, but when she met someone else who might be suitable, the pain would slowly fade away. Well, this kind of persistence was rare in the world, but it didn't mean that it didn't exist. Jin Yulin was such an example. Back then, even if Lin Huiyin had already married Liang Xiqing, who was the most suitable for her, even if Jin Yulin was very rational and hid his love deep in his heart, even if he became lifelong friends with the couple, Jin Yulin still deeply loved this woman who was beautiful and talented. Jin Yulin wasn't like the more famous Xu Zimo. The latter divorced his first wife after falling in love with Lin Huiyin. It was also because of Lin Huiyin that he wrote many love poems. However, after Lin Huiyin got married, he fell in love with another woman. Jin Yulin never married, and he was infatuated and waited for Lin Huiyin his entire life. There was an anecdote about Elder Jin. It was said that after Lin Huiyin passed away, Elder Jin invited a guest to a restaurant in the capital. When his old friends received the invitation, they were all puzzled. They didn't know why Elder Jin was spending so much money. It wasn't until the banquet that Elder Jin explained in disappointment that today was Huiyin's birthday. The world might not understand Elder Jin's infatuation, and they might even feel that it wasn't worth it. Zheng Yujie was the same. She loved Poplar Fruit. She loved his personality and talent. She loved his gentleness and thoughtfulness. In her heart, Poplar Fruit was the only one in this life. This had nothing to do with whether Poplar Fruit loved her or not. This logic was very difficult to understand. However, this was love. This was the kind of love that made people make choices that were unimaginable to onlookers. However, Zheng Yujie wasn't as extraordinary as Elder Jin. She would still be jealous and sad. After these emotions had accumulated for a few days, she finally couldn't help but explode with a small matter. Poplar Fruit, who had a low EQ, was muddle-headed. Naturally, he wouldn't think of this aspect. He thought that Zheng Yujie was angry because he let her down. That night, he tried his best to apologize to Zheng Yujie. He even offered his not-so-perfect rabbitwood carving as an apology. In front of the person she liked, Zheng Yujie's anger came strangely and disappeared strangely. After she took the rabbitwood carving, she actually smiled. She smiled very happily, but there were still some tears in the corners of her eyes. The next day, Poplar Fruit sent Zheng Yujie to the airport in the neighboring city to take a plane. Before boarding the plane, Yang Guo's deliberate courtesy did not succeed. Queen Zheng did not allow him to say anything and tightly hugged him. In the end, Queen Zheng put down little brother Yang in satisfaction. She waved her hand and left with her somewhat long hair. Her unruly back view was still so elegant. Queen Zheng has returned to Beijing. Poplar Fruit is also about to return to Yangcheng. Xiao Han has been in Guishan province for a long time. Everyone is probably tired of it. Don't worry, this part will be over soon. However, Xiao Han still has to say that the reason why he wrote so much in this part was not because Xiao Han wanted to deliberately add water. I believe that some readers have already seen that July and August 2012 was the time when the two most important careers in Poplar Fruit's life took off. It was also a watershed for this book. Poplar Fruit was an ordinary person who didn't know how to sing or act. It wasn't easy for him to get on the big stage of Where Are We Going, Dad? His modeling experience in October might be one of the reasons, but it definitely wasn't the decisive factor. What was it? Let's guess. In addition, regarding the love story of this book, Xiao Han said a few more words. Feng Beibei doesn't seem to be very liked by everyone. It's okay, everyone still doesn't know her well enough. Her scenes will slowly increase in the future. Queen Zheng isn't the female lead. This has been emphasized all along. But Queen Zheng is very important. Or rather, Xiao Han really likes Queen Zheng's character. Xiao Han won't write her as tragic as Elder Jin. He can only say that he will give everyone an explanation in the ending. Xiao Han doesn't dare to say that everyone will be 100% satisfied, but the ending will definitely not be a tragedy. Xiao Han swears in the name of Kiki. *0 everyone, please read on patiently. Xiao Han wants to write a different story. He wants to write an ordinary but destined to be extraordinary Poplar Fruit. Chapter 6:15. Hurry up and get up. Why are you still sleeping in the middle of the day? Hurry up and run with this old man. Sob, sob, it's only 7 o'clock. Old man, can you let me sleep a little longer? Get up, don't get up. My saber doesn't recognize birds. Clang. Ah. Such conversations were repeated in Poplar Fruit's room. For some unknown reason or since when, Xiong Kahu and Fat Dragon, this pair of enemies, had been at loggerheads. Fat Dragon was a night owl, the kind that was especially fat. He slept very late at night, sometimes even later than Poplar Fruit's 2 or 3 o'clock. Then he slept in the middle of the day, not eating breakfast and not waking up until lunchtime. Xiong Kahu once strolled over to Poplar Fruit's place. Seeing Fat Dragon sleeping like a pig, he came over every morning to wake him up for a run. Xiong Kahu's reason was to let Fat Dragon develop good habits and lose weight. Look at you. You're so fat that you're almost heavier than my daughter-in-law's flour. Hurry up and exercise. Don't sit in front of the table every day. Be careful that you don't die before you're 40. Fatty Dragon strongly suspected that Xiong Kahu was abusing his position for personal gain. He was deliberately making things difficult for him. Early in the morning, Xiong Kahu wanted to kill such a good opportunity to sleep. It was too inhumane, but what could he do? Xiong Kahu would always come to find him after practicing with Poplar Fruit on the mountain. With 2 Miaodao in his hands, Fat Dragon refused to get up from the bed. With the first slash, Fat Dragon's pants would have a large hole. With the second slash, Fat Dragon would feel a chill in his lower body with his eyes closed. Half of his hair would flutter in the air like catkins in the spring wind. This time, it was like lightning. A chill ran up his spine and soaked his entire brain. Fat Dragon was finally awake. He was completely awake and did not feel sleepy at all. Without waiting for the third stab, Fat Dragon scrambled out of bed and followed Xiongkahu for a jog with tears and snot. Old Master Xiongkahu did not torture him any further. He took him for a jog around the village before letting him go back. Although it was just a jog, although it was only 2 laps, Fat Dragon was already as tired as a dog when he came back. He was lying on the bed, unable to move. However, the effect was still good. Later, Fat Dragon no longer stayed up late at night and ran 2 laps during the day. His mental state also improved a lot. Of course, his weight still did not decrease. These few days did not show any effect. On the second day after Zhang Yujie went back, Poplar Fruit received a call that surprised him. The reason why it was a surprise was because this brother of his was really unpredictable. Sometimes when Poplar Fruit called to ask about him, his phone would often be turned off. And when he called Poplar Fruit, it was either early in the morning, late at night, or during dinner time. Anyway, none of his calls were on time. Seeing the caller ID, Poplar Fruit smiled. He picked up the phone and said with a smile, "Big brother, you're back from your mission? I just came back. Fuck, this time I've been busy for a month. It's not easy to get a few days off, and you're still in Guishan?" He Wenjua's rough voice came from the phone, still as unruly as before. "Hey, big brother, how do you know I'm in Guishan?" Poplar Fruit felt very magical. The last time the two talked, he had just experienced the disaster of Qi and had just arrived in Taiyuan province. Logically speaking, even if he Wenjua didn't ask if he was in Taiyuan province, he should have asked if he had returned to Guangdong province. "Hehe, you brat, you encountered such a big thing in Guishan province and didn't ask me for help. You're hiding it, right?" He Wenjua laughed and said, "Our public security department has already informed me. They checked your license plate number and asked about it here." Poplar Fruit now understood that it should be Liu Guoliang who asked them to check. However, what he didn't know was that if Liu Guoliang himself checked, the police in Guangdong province wouldn't know. It was all his gossipy lover who caused the trouble. "Hehe, big brother, there's no need to trouble you for such a small matter." Poplar Fruit scratched his head and smiled embarrassedly. "Besides, aren't I in Guishan Mountain? It's so far away, I don't want to trouble you." "What are you talking about?" He Wenjua was unhappy. He said, "You think that your big brother he is too far away to help, and can't help much at your mountain, right? Hehe, I want to tell you a fact. Before my father came to Guangdong province, he was a soldier in the Shudu military region for 5 years. Now, the deputy political commissar of Shudu is my father's comrade-in-arms in the same class. You tell me, can't I help you?" Poplar Fruit laughed and said, "Well, big brother, I was wrong. I should have looked for you first at that time. Forget it, let's not talk about you. You couldn't find me at that time." He Wenjua waved his hand and said, "How is it now? Is the little policeman in Guishan still bothering you? What's the matter?" Poplar Fruit hesitated for a moment, but still told He Wenjua what had happened, and then said, "It's all solved now. The deputy county magistrate and his subordinates have been arrested, including the director of the Public Security Bureau. You're killing a pig with a butcher's knife." He Wenjua seriously criticized Poplar Fruit and said, "Do you need to take such a big risk to steal the account book for such a small matter? You can tell big brother, and I'll let my father talk to them. Can't it be solved easily? I didn't know you had connections here." Poplar Fruit complained. "Forget it, this matter is over. Next time, you can't be so reckless. You can't use your kung fu like this." He Wenjua didn't hold on to this matter. He asked curiously, "By the way, why did you stay in Guishan province for so long? Aren't you about to start school?" Poplar Fruit told him what he was doing. He Wenjua expressed his approval of Poplar Fruit's kindness, but he wasn't too interested. Instead, He Wenjua took Poplar Fruit's words to heart that he still needed to learn Miaodao for 2 more days and understand the essence of the moves before returning to Yang City. "What Miaodao? Which master did you meet?" He Wenjua asked excitedly. He knew how powerful Poplar Fruit's kung fu was. If Poplar Fruit was interested in someone, it must be a master above the master level. Master Xiongkahu. His 2-handed Miaodao is very powerful. By the way, he used to be a special forces soldier, but at that time, he was called a scout. He was very famous during the war with Nanu. Poplar Fruit proudly introduced his master. Wait, what did you say? Xiongkahu? The Saber King Xiongkahu, who was known as one of the top 10 soldier kings in the southwest 30 years ago. Is it really Xiongkahu? He Wunjua was so excited that he was incoherent. Poplar Fruit felt that Big Brother he was a little fanatical, like a fan who saw his idol. With Poplar Fruit's confirmation, he Wunjua could no longer suppress the joy in his heart. Poplar Fruit, wait, don't move. I want to go, I want to go. Chapter 6:16. Test, test, cough cough, children, did you hear Teacher Poplar Fruit's speech? Poplar Fruit tapped on the microphone in front of the camera and smiled slightly. Yes. Xiong Xiaolin, who was sitting with a straight face, answered with a straight face. You could tell from her voice. Xiong Xiaofeng, on the other hand, was leading the other children in giggling. Most of them were swaying left and right, and including Chichi, they were all shouting very happily. I heard it, hehe, I heard it. You heard it. Kiki said she heard it. Feng Jiji said he heard it too. Kiki also screamed without backing down. Poplar Fruit, who was upstairs, could hear her voice. Everyone sit properly. Listen to Poplar Fruit. Oh, listen to the teacher's lecture. Xiongkahu sat next to the projector and said to the naughty children while blowing his beard and glaring at them. In the end, the tribe leader's prestige was great. Once he opened his mouth, the chaotic children quieted down, lowered their heads, and obediently sat back in their seats. Everyone is very obedient. That's good, let's start the lecture today. Poplar Fruit smiled at the microphone and said, Today, Teacher Yang will teach you the 48 phonetic symbols of English. Other than Yang Luoqi and Xiong Xiaolin, the child who is the most enthusiastic and answers the questions the best can come with me to the county to play tomorrow. Teacher will treat you to a big meal. Hearing Poplar Fruit's words, the children immediately straightened their backs and looked eagerly at Poplar Fruit on the screen. They were eager to give it a try. For these Meow children who stayed in the mountains all year round, not to mention a big meal, even a trip to the county to play was a very extravagant wish. Little Feng Jie, Yang Luoqi is Kiki's name. Sitting on a small stool, Kiki couldn't help but turn her head and whisper to Xiong Xiaofeng. Kiki, don't whisper to each other. Sit tight and listen to the lecture. Poplar Fruit's voice was very gentle as he grabbed the little girl. This was clearly transmitted to Poplar Fruit's projector through the camera and the network. In this way, a corresponding virtual classroom was formed. Yang Guo could teach in front of the camera and the projector about the children's situation. Although it was an online lecture, Poplar Fruit simulation was no different from a real classroom. The teacher was still teaching, and the children were listening. The only difference was that the teacher became an image on the screen and was connected by the network. This was only the first attempt, and because the school was in full swing to demolish and build a new house, Poplar Fruit asked Fat Dragon to move the equipment to Xiongji's house. The main classroom was set up in the lobby on the first floor. It was spacious and could seat 10 children, which were the children selected by Poplar Fruit to cooperate with him. Poplar Fruit's classroom was only on the second floor, which was next to Poplar Fruit's. After Zheng Yujie went back, Poplar Fruit cleaned the room and let Fat Dragon arrange various equipment. The remote education classroom that Poplar Fruit planned to build was more luxurious and advanced than the current simple classroom. Now, the children all had small desks and laptops. There were no computers for them to use because the more than 300 custom-made computers by Poplar Fruit had not been delivered yet. At present, the only 3 computers were used by Fat Dragon as transfer equipment. When the computers arrived, the children did not need to look up at the projector screen as hard as they did now. The images would be transmitted to the computer screen on their desks through Fat Dragon's server. After a lesson, Poplar Fruit asked the children to go home. He went downstairs and discussed the problems encountered in the morning with Fat Dragon. Let me say one first. You can't leave no one on this mountain. Fat Dragon tapped on the keyboard and pulled out the interactive software that he thought was insufficient. Then, he modified it and said to Poplar Fruit, I don't think Uncle Xiong and the others know how to use these devices. What if they malfunction? Regarding this problem, Poplar Fruit said confidently, you can write a manual for the use of the devices and simple maintenance methods. We can let one of them learn it. Then, we won't need to stay on the mountain anymore. Speaking of this, Poplar Fruit turned to Xiongkahu and Xiongjiwu, who were sitting and watching, and said, Master, and Brother Jiwu, I have a proposal to discuss with you. Xiongkahu waved his hand and said casually, discuss what? If there's anything you need from us, just tell us. We don't know what you're talking about. Over the past few days, although Xiongkahu didn't say anything, he admired and was grateful to his disciple. It had nothing to do with the two-handed Miaodao he taught Poplar Fruit. These days, Poplar Fruit was busy running around and working hard for the education of the children in the village. Not only did he spend money, but he also did his best. Xiongkahu saw it all, but he kept it in his heart. In this regard, Xiongkahu worked very hard when he taught Poplar Fruit the two-handed Miaodao in the morning. He didn't hide anything and completely trained Poplar Fruit as his last disciple. He even taught Poplar Fruit his life's combat experience. At present, in terms of knife skills, Poplar Fruit was already a super master who was invincible in the entire Xiong village. Even Xiongkahu himself felt that he couldn't beat Poplar Fruit. Of course, this was also related to age. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, Master, look at what you're saying. How can you let me make the decision for everything? After all, my ability is limited. Everyone has to discuss and gather the wisdom of the group. Only then can we arrange things properly and avoid detours in the future. When the class just started, you saw it too, Master. The children weren't sitting very well. Even during the class, there were some children who were whispering to each other or being absent-minded. Fortunately, Master was there, so there wasn't any trouble. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, but it can't go on like this. In the future, we'll be in a city hundreds or thousands of kilometers away. If the children suddenly run out to play by themselves midway, we won't be able to control them. It's okay. This old man can just keep an eye on them. Xiongkahu waved his hand and said indifferently, it's not a big deal. If that child doesn't listen, just grab him and give him 2 whips. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, Master, we don't need this kind of stick education anymore. Beating the children to force them to study is a bad idea. The best way is for us teachers to give the children some more attractive classroom education so that they can voluntarily study hard. This is what we want to see. Besides, Master, you're the chief and have to deal with the affairs of the village. We can't let you sit in this classroom with the children every day, right? Poplar Fruit said. Chapter 617. One moment, you say that you can't do it without me, and the next moment, you say that you don't need me. What exactly do you want? Xiongkahu obviously wasn't as patient as Poplar Fruit. He was very hot-tempered, and his dissatisfaction was followed by a clamor. To be honest, Poplar Fruit was a little long-winded. This was related to his personality. Most of the people who were willing to be teachers and deal with children were the type of people who were resistant to hardships. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, Master, don't worry. I'm thinking that since Brother Jiwu doesn't have a job now, it's not realistic to ask him to do farming or work. Why don't we ask Brother Jiwu to be the children's teacher? Before Poplar Fruit finished speaking, Xiongjiwu blushed and waved his hand. Poplar Fruit, no, I haven't even studied for a few years. How can I teach children? Yes. This won't work. He doesn't even know how to teach, Xiongkahu said firmly. You can sympathize with Jiwu, but you can't harm the children. Poplar Fruit didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Master, and Brother Jiwu, you didn't hear me out. I'm talking about being a teacher, not asking you to teach. We can teach. You, as a teacher, mainly have to manage the children and supervise them to go to class and do their homework on time. Also, you have to control our equipment and deal with some unexpected situations. For example, if a child gets into a fight, you have to educate them in time. If the machine breaks down, you have to rush to repair it or report to us for a replacement. Xiongjiwu understood this time, but he still shook his head and said with some uncertainty, I don't know how to use these machines, let alone repair them. You can learn if you don't know. Poplar Fruit smiled. Who was born knowing how to do it? Don't worry, I'll let Fat Dragon stay on the mountain until he teaches you. Poplar Fruit pretended not to see Fat Dragon's sad little eyes. Poplar Fruit's words are reasonable. Who was born knowing how to do it? Xiongkahu clapped his hands and said happily, Xiaowu, what Poplar Fruit said just now is really the most suitable thing for you to do. It's not that I want to criticize you, but with your legs, you can't do any other job well. Why don't you take care of the children in the village? Poplar Fruit chose Xiongjiwu as their class teacher not because he sympathized with Xiongjiwu, but just as Xiongkahu said, Xiongjiwu was the most suitable person for this job. Xiongjiwu had a good personality, especially when he got along with the children in the stockade. Many of them liked him. It was reasonable to say that the children should be afraid when they saw Xiongjiwu with a lame leg, but Xiongjiwu was the opposite. He was not as muscular as the other adult men in the Hong village, nor was he like Xiongkahu, who always had a poker face. He was humble and liked to chat with the children. Usually, if there was anything delicious, he would share it with the children who came over as guests. Therefore, Xiongjiwu was the most amiable person in the eyes of the children in the Hong village, and the children were happy to listen to him. Not only that, but because Xiongjiwu had trained Xiong Xiaolin, who was admitted to the county's key middle school, this was an unprecedented event in the village. Many aunties came to visit Xiongjiwu to learn from him. If Xiongjiwu helped to take care of such a naughty child, the parents would be more relieved. Speaking of which, the class teacher that Poplar Fruit mentioned was not an ordinary class teacher. There would be more than 300 children studying in the entire school, and the 1st to 6th grades would be divided into 6 classes. Xiongjiwu would have to take care of the children in the 6 classes at the same time. He would be the class teacher who was at the level of a principal. However, in order to repay Poplar Fruit, Xiongkahu waved his hand and removed the position of principal under Poplar Fruit's name without any explanation. Therefore, Xiongjiwu could only be the class teacher. This was just a difference in name. For the principal of the Hong village's primary school who had no real power, this title was just a symbol of honor. It was unrealistic for one person to keep an eye on 6 grades, even though there were only 6 classes in total. Poplar Fruit taught Xiongjiwu a good idea. You can let each class elect a class monitor, vice class monitor, or take turns to help you manage the class. This will not only improve your efficiency, but also strengthen the children's sense of self-discipline. I believe that the children who are working as cadres will definitely work harder. This method had long been used by the schools in the city. Some children even cultivated a sense of bureaucracy from an early age. In the middle of last year, the news of the teenager with 5 bars in Wucheng caused a large-scale discussion. Poplar Fruit would not let the children become cold politicians, but introducing the class committee system could still help to integrate the current scattered Hong village schools. Poplar Fruit also taught Xiongjiwu a lot of skills of being a class director. He did not have much experience, but last semester, in order to be a qualified teaching assistant, Poplar Fruit found a lot of books in this field to read. At least he could talk about armchair strategies for a day and a half. Of course, Poplar Fruit just said that he would give Xiongjiwu additional training in the future. These skills gave Xiongjiwu a lot of inspiration and restored his confidence. However, Xiongjiwu was still a little hesitant. Poplar Fruit understood what he was thinking. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "Brother Jiwu, don't worry. I won't let you work for nothing. I'll give you 1,500 yuan a month, the same as the county's teachers. You help to take care of the children and deal with the school's affairs. This can be considered a proper job. I'm not asking for money. This is not appropriate." Money was what Xiongjiwu lacked the most at the moment. Xiong Xiaolin had to study in the county, and Yi Nusang had to eat some good food to nourish her body. Although Poplar Fruit had left him a few thousand yuan, Poplar Fruit had helped their family so much. Xiongjiwu was still thinking about when to return the money to Poplar Fruit. Xiongkahu thought for a while and said, "Jiwu, Poplar Fruit is right. You should take the money, and Poplar Fruit, you don't have to pay for this money. I'll discuss with the elders of the other 2 strongholds. We'll each pay a part of it. We can't let you work for nothing. You also have a family to support. That's too much." Xiongjiwu said somewhat embarrassedly, Everyone in the village goes out to work and doesn't send more than 1,000 yuan back home every month. If I take so much, I'll be envied. Besides, I didn't do much. I just helped to take care of the children. If I take the same amount as the teacher, I'll feel uneasy. What's there to feel uneasy about? Xiongkahu said angrily, if anyone is not pleasing to the eye, tell them to come to me. I'll beat them to death. However, Xiongjiwu was unwilling to accept such a high salary of 1,500 yuan. Poplar Fruit's brain worked very quickly. He immediately came up with a new idea. How about this? Brother Jiwu, you can take the monthly salary of 900 yuan for the time being. Later, we'll discuss the agenda and raise it. In addition, I want sister-in-law to go to the school to help. What she needs to do is to cook for the children. Don't some of the students in our school come from the 2 strongholds next door? It will take them at least half an hour to come here. Don't go back at noon. Stay at the school and eat. Our family will give sister-in-law some food expenses every month. We'll discuss the amount later. This is convenient for the children and can also give sister-in-law something to do. That's a good idea. Xiongkahu clapped and laughed. Chapter 6:18. Kiki, look, I caught a white-eyed sparrow. In the afternoon, Poplar Fruit and Kiki, who had just taken a nap, were washing their faces in the room. A boy from Miao village ran in excitedly. His feet were dark, and there was a lot of sand in the crevices. Poplar Fruit recognized the child. He smiled and patted his little head, saying in Miao language, Anshian, did you forget where you left your shoes again? Hurry up and find them and put them on. Your mother will beat you again later. Anshian was still a little afraid of Poplar Fruit, but at this time, the children were all newborn calves. He was not afraid anymore. He said loudly, Father Kiki, I know where it is. It's under the tree. I won't lose it. The children in the mountains were excellent at climbing trees and digging out bird nests. Poplar Fruit did not say anything, but he secretly told himself that he must do a good job of educating Kiki. He could not let a girl climb trees. It was too dangerous. Brother, the bird is so pitiful. Can you not hold it? When Chichi saw the small and exquisite bird that was held in Xiong'Anshian's little hand with its wings clamped, her bodhisattva heart that bemoaned the state of the universe and pitied the fate of mankind came up again. Her big watery eyes looked pitifully at Xiong'Anshian and said. Xiong'Anshian did not expect that his behavior, which was like presenting a treasure, would be seen as an evil act of bullying the bird in Kiki's eyes. After hearing Kiki's pleading, Xiong'Anshian quickly put the bird behind him and said loudly, No. It was not easy for me to catch it. No, no. Kiki pouted her lower lip, turned around, and pulled Poplar Fruit's trousers sadly and said, Oh, Papa, the bird is so pitiful. Poplar Fruit bent down and patted his daughter's little head. He smiled and said to Xiong'Anshian, Anshian, come, show uncle what kind of bird it is. Xiong'Anshian was still very vigilant. He covered his back with his hands and refused to take it. He shook his head and said, No. You will snatch it from me. The white-eyed sparrow is mine. Kiki, who was overly worried that Xiong'Anshian would suffocate the bird, had tears in her eyes. She tugged at her father's arm with a pitiful look on her face, as if she could empathize with the bird's plight. Poplar Fruit smiled and comforted the nervous Xiong'Anshian. No, uncle just wants to see what kind of bird it is. How can there be a white-eyed sparrow? We are called white-eyed sparrows. Xiong'Anshian took the bird back and pointed it out to Poplar Fruit. Abba Kiki, look, its eyes are white. Poplar Fruit took a closer look. It was a small, brown-feathered bird. Its tail feathers were very long, and like the feathers on its back, it had dark brown vertical stripes. The more conspicuous part was its eyes. Its eyes were white, and there was a long white eyebrow by its eyes, extending evenly from front to back. It looked very much like the slender and curved eyebrows of beauties in ancient literature. Isn't this a thrush bird? Poplar Fruit asked in surprise. He had a deep impression of this kind of bird, which was named because of its white eyebrows. He had seen it when he was climbing Baiyun Mountain, and it was the market bird of Yangcheng City. What is a thrush? Poplar Fruit said the word thrush in Mandarin, so Xiong'Anshian didn't understand. He said, It's a white-browed sparrow. My Abba taught me. Different places had different names, so poplar fruit didn't delve too deeply into it. When Kiki saw the pitiful thrush bird, she became even more sad. She pulled her father's finger and said with a sobbing tone, "Abba, help it, birds fly in the air, don't catch it." Poplar fruit loved his daughter's kind heart. He looked at the thrush bird, rolled his eyes, and came up with an idea. Poplar fruit said with a smile, "Anshian, Uncle has a suggestion." Anshiran looked at poplar fruit puzzledly. "You give this bird to Uncle." Before poplar fruit finished speaking, Anshiran immediately retracted his hand and shouted with great vigilance, "No, this is mine. Woo woo, woo 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 woo." Frightened by Anshiran's shout, Kiki could no longer hold back and cried miserably. Yanguo felt a headache coming on. Sometimes, it was really hard to reason with children because they didn't have as many twists and turns as adults. They were all very straightforward. Moreover, they would definitely not listen to other people's advice, nor would they listen to it. It was already not easy to persuade Anshiran to give in, but now Kiki was crying in his ear, which made him even more annoyed. Seeing Anshiran's watery eyes, as if he was frightened by Kiki, he was worried that poplar fruit would bully him and try to snatch his bird, so he looked around and prepared to slip away. Poplar fruit quickly finished his words, "Anshiran, Uncle won't snatch your bird, but if you are willing to exchange, Uncle can let you see a giant panda." Giant panda? Anshiran had heard of giant pandas. Gui Mountain was close to Chuan Province, and he had heard of them from the older generation of Miao tribe elders. "Yes, Kiki and I adopted a giant panda in Chuan Province." "She didn't tell you, did she?" Poplar fruit saw Anshiran's interest and knew that there was hope. He said with a smile, "There are photos and videos on the computer. Do you want to see them?" Anshiran's eyes showed a little desire. Thrush was very common in Gui Mountain, and Anshiran had caught one before. To be honest, it was nothing strange for him. As for giant pandas, although he had heard of them, he had never seen one before. This was more attractive. "Brother is a bad guy, Papa, don't show it to him." Kiki choked and said angrily. Anshiran was also a teenager, and he couldn't stand being stimulated. He immediately retorted, "Who wants to see your giant panda?" "Humph, I don't want it." Although he said this, Anshiran just curled his lips and turned his head, but his body didn't move. He was just stubborn, but he still wanted it very much. Poplar fruit said with a smile, "Okay, no one is allowed to quarrel. Friends should be polite to each other and care for each other. Do you still remember the story I told you about the two little goats crossing the bridge?" Kiki and Anshiran nodded silently, and Kiki's sobs became softer and softer. Poplar fruit said with a smile, "Yes, let's each take a step back. Won't we still be good friends in the future?" "Kiki, you have to be generous and share the photos of you and chubby boy with brother Anshiran. Anshiran, as a big brother, you have to give in to your little sister when she's not sensible. You can't quarrel with her, right?" Anshiran lowered his head and nodded with some embarrassment. He didn't know what Anshiran was struggling with in his heart. He hesitated for a moment, then walked forward, took Kiki's little hand, and said, "Kiki, I'll give this white-eyed sparrow to you. Don't cry, okay?" Kiki saw her father take the thrush bird and then walk to the window to set it free. She smiled through her tears, and her tear-stained smiling face was especially cute. "Brother, come with me. Kiki will show you chubby boy," Kiki said softly with a nasal voice. At this moment, the melodious cry of the newly released thrush bird came from outside the window. It seemed to be saying thanks, and also seemed to be continuing Kiki's soft childish voice. Poplar fruit suddenly thought of a poem, "Only then did I know to lock myself in a golden cage to listen, but not as free as the cry in the forest." Kiki understood this at such a young age. Chapter 619. Big Brother he was here, but he was not alone. When they heard that they were going to look for poplar fruit, and that there was also a legendary soldier king from the Southwest Special Forces, the martial arts enthusiasts from the Special Forces immediately followed them. Meng Sanhua had been talking about poplar fruit for a long time. How could he let go of such an opportunity? Big Bear, Second Bear, and third bear were just there for fun. They had nowhere to go during their short break, so they decided to come to Hong Village with their brothers. There was a soldier that Poplar Fruit had met before, but they did not talk much with him. This time, he also came along. Big brother Yin Liuqing. Poplar Fruit had a good memory. He had only heard of Yin Liuqing's name once, so he took the initiative to extend his hand and greet Yin Liuqing. Hello. Yin Liuqing was a little surprised. He looked at He Wenjue in confusion, as if he thought that the captain had told Poplar Fruit about him in advance. Yin Liuqing was a pretty name, but the owner was a dark-skinned man. He was not tall, nor was he as strong as Poplar Fruit's brother Yang Zhengdong. However, his muscles were very tight, like Meng Sanhua, very explosive. Yin Liuqing was carrying a long guitar case. After he opened it, Poplar Fruit realized that it was not a musical instrument, nor was it a sniper rifle that was often seen in movies. It was a knife. Hey! Poplar Fruit realized that there were so many familiar faces, but one person was missing. Big brother, where is Big brother Zhengdong? He didn't come. He Wenjue said. Big brother Dong is injured, and he is lying in the hospital. Second bear said straightforwardly. Injured? How did he get injured? Is it serious? Poplar Fruit was shocked. He had a good relationship with Yang Zhengdong. When he first went to the military camp, he got to know Yang Zhengdong. Then, Yang Zhengdong taught him how to use a gun. To a certain extent, he was one of Poplar Fruit's masters. After that, Poplar Fruit went to the military camp twice, and their relationship got even better. He Wenjue actually did not want to say it, because Yang Zhengdong had told him not to worry Poplar Fruit before he came. But Second Bear had already said it, so he could only stare at him, and shook his head and said, I was bitten when I was on a mission. It's nothing, and I'll be fine after 2 months of rest. Yang Zhengdong was indeed fine. He was wearing a bulletproof vest. He was only shot in the butt. More flesh on his butt, so he was able to Poplar Fruit in the end. Compared to other major injuries like broken limbs, Yang Zhengdong was considered lucky. At least he would be able to jump around after a few months. However, after the bullet was removed, it would take some time to recover, so he could only lie down in the military hospital. Yes, he was lying down like a puppy. Although Poplar Fruit said it calmly when he saw He Wenjue, as a normal person, Poplar Fruit still felt bad when he heard that his friend was shot. He shook his head and said, Big brother Zhengdong is not a friend. He didn't even say anything when he got injured. I'll go back to Yang Cheng in a few days, and I'll go see him. Yang Zhengdong aside, when Big Brother he arrived, Cai Simon had just delivered the last batch of goods. Poplar Fruit received a call from him on the way. Big Brother Ji Sure, is Master in the village? Yes, the goods are here. Tell everyone to go down the mountain and move them up. I just came back from the county. Poplar Fruit immediately called up the mountain. What is it? He Wenjue sat in the passenger seat and asked. Because there were more people, Xiong Da and Xiong sat in the second row. They were both big men, and the word big was not enough to describe their bodies. There was no space for Yin Liuqing, who was slimmer, in the second row. Hence, Xiong San and Yin Liuqing had to sit on the floor at the back of the car. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, Didn't I tell you that I'm going to provide remote education for the children in the mountains? The computers that I ordered from Beijing have arrived. Hence, He Wenjue and the other soldiers from the special forces rolled up their sleeves and carried the computers with the Miao people. Cai Simon used to be a poor farmer, so she wasn't surprised that she came to the mountains. Instead, the delivery drivers were shocked. Not long after the car stopped, a group of Miao people in black and short coats surrounded them before they could say anything. They spoke in a language that they couldn't understand. 2 of them even had swords that were half a person's height strapped to their backs. Those who didn't know better would think that they had encountered bandit. What made them even more frightened were the people who came down from the Land Rover behind them. Not to mention the weak scholar who was driving, the people behind him were all very strong, especially the 3 big men. Each of them was more than 1.9 meters tall, and their arms were thicker than a normal person's thigh. Xiong San was the most aggrieved. He curled up in the back of the car and felt very uncomfortable. After he got down from the car, Xiong San shook his legs, causing the mountain rocks to shake. It was really shocking. Inadvertently, the few drivers who finally calmed down and got out of the car to watch the show ran back to the car. This made the honest Xiong-san confused. Jisha. Poplar Fruit waved at Hiwanjua and smiled. This is my big brother, Hiwanjua, and behind him are his comrades. Poplar Fruit introduced them one by one, and also introduced the Miao people to Hiwanjua and the rest. Poplar Fruit had a superhuman memory. Among the Miao people present, many of them had only met Poplar Fruit once, but Poplar Fruit remembered their names. When he introduced them to his big brother and the rest, it brought a lot of surprise to the Miao people, and also eased the silent atmosphere. The more down-to-earth people were, the more they worshipped the strong. Originally, the Miao people were a little estranged from Hiwanjua and the rest due to the language barrier. However, when they saw Hiwanjua and the rest taking the lead to carry a few boxes and striding with Poplar Fruit, they quickly recognized these outsiders. Even the shy Xiong Jisha started chatting with the simple-looking Xiong Da. He forgot to mention that Xiong Da's surname was not Xiong. Among the three big men, Xiong Da, Xiong and Xiong-san, only Xiong surname was Xiong. However, this nickname gave Xiong Jisha and the rest a lot of good feelings. What surprised the drivers the most was Poplar Fruit. No matter how they looked at him, that gentlemanly guy, who looked like a volunteer teacher, actually carried 4 big boxes by himself, hanging them with a pole. Actually, to Poplar Fruit, these were not heavy. If it were not for the fact that he could not carry so many boxes and was afraid of breaking them, Poplar Fruit could even carry 1 or 2 more. Everyone, slow down, be careful. Cai Simon, who was wearing glasses that were as thick as beer bottles, weakly commanded from behind, be careful when carrying these things. These things are very delicate. Although the 300 computers did not have to carry the bulky mainframe, they still filled up 3 trucks. More than 20 strong men from the 3 strongholds, including Poplar Fruit and the rest, needed to carry them for 2 days. When they finally finished, the sky was already dark. Chapter 620. Due to the poor circuit and the Miao people's frugality, when night fell, the Xiong village looked bleak and cold from the outside. In front of the village, the shadows of the lanterns and trees swayed as if demons were dancing. Only an old man stood at the entrance of the village like a mountain, unaffected by the environment. The old man is really something, Hiwanjua whispered in Poplar Fruit's ear. In fact, it was not the first time they met Xiong Kahu. Poplar Fruit had introduced them to each other during the first 2 trips. However, at that time, Xiong Kahu was like an ordinary old man among the mountain people, not threatening at all. Although Xiong Kahu's hair and beard were all white, and his body had shrunk a little, he still stood upright in the mountain wind, as if he was the towering mountain behind him. His aura was restrained, but it still felt vigorous and majestic. Hiwanjua was not a martial arts master, so he did not feel it deeply. The one who felt it the most was Meng Sanhua, a martial arts fanatic. His eyes widened like a searchlight. Meng Sanhua did not bother to pester Poplar Fruit. Old man Xiong attracted him deeply like a magnet. Poplar Fruit smiled and ignored these violent maniacs. He took the lead to move the remaining computers into the ancestral hall. It was also a stilted building of the Miao people, but the style was more simple and solemn. Because the school was undergoing major renovation, the ancestral hall was specially emptied to store these precious computers. Papa! Xiong Xiaolin could not stop her. Kiki ran all the way into her father's arms. She pouted and said, "It's dark." Kiki is so scared. The little girl had been wanting to go down the mountain with her father, but Poplar Fruit had to carry so many boxes and had no time to take care of her. So he asked Xiong Xiaolin to control Kiki. Although Kiki did not cry or make a fuss, her aggrieved look was pitiful. Poplar Fruit didn't care that he was dirty. Anyway, he had to take a bath later. Smiling, he picked up his daughter and said, "Hey, isn't Daddy back?" "Haha. Poplar Fruit, your daughter is too gutsy. My Xiao Chen dared to sleep alone when he was 2 years old," Hiwanjua said with a grin. "How can it be compared?" Poplar Fruit said unhappily. "Kiki is a girl. Besides, she's only 1.5 years old. She's still far from 2 years old." Poplar Fruit thought to himself. It was probably because Big Brother he was too rash. After returning from the military, he wanted to do something shameful with his sister-in-law. Then, he left his own son in the next room. Hiwanjwa laughed and said, "Only 1.5 years old. I forgot. Kiki is already so big. Your sister-in-law used to say that Kiki grew up quickly because she drank imported milk powder. Kiki, do you still know uncle?" Meng Sanhua probably ran back to Yangguo's side after being rejected by old master Xiongkahu. When he saw Chichi, who had changed into Miao attire, he greeted her with a smile. The ancestral hall was still very bright, but Kiki still stared at Meng Sanhua for a long time. Meng Sanhua thought that Kiki could not recognize him, but Kiki giggled. She pulled Poplar Fruit's collar and pointed at Meng Sanhua. "I recognize you. You fought with Papa and got spanked by Papa." Meng Sanhua's face turned red. He scratched his head awkwardly. He did not expect Kiki to still remember him. And Kiki actually remembered the scene 2 months ago. Poplar Fruit came to the barracks to play, and Poplar Fruit kicked him down from the air. What a disgrace. Didn't you see those naughty guys covering their mouths and laughing? Poplar Fruit also wanted to laugh, but he was too embarrassed to do so. He could only pat Kiki's little head and criticize her. "Kiki, don't talk nonsense. This is Uncle Meng. Kiki is not talking nonsense. Kiki remembers everything," Kiki said as she shook her father's chin. After that, Xiongkahu invited these heroes from afar, according to his words, to his house for dinner. Of course, it was a normal meal. The only highlight was the horn wine. Horn wine was a delicate-looking utensil made from buffalo horns by the Miao people. The wine was glutinous rice-aged, and it was the Miao people's proudest creation. Previously, Yanguo didn't drink, so no one appreciated Xiongkahu's hospitality. This time, he saw that these burly men were all heroes in wine, so he took out a jar of 20-year-old wine from the cellar and poured it out. The fragrance was strong, and the color was brown like diluted honey. The gluttonous Xiongsan didn't even drink it before clapping his hands and shouting that it was good wine. Before drinking, they had to go through the etiquette of the Miao people. A few girls who were dressed gorgeously held a horn cup and fed each of them a sip of wine. Other than Poplar Fruit, who did not touch a single drop of wine, the others were not allowed to refuse. Even Fat Dragon, who had the worst alcohol tolerance, drank a cup. Hiwanjwa drank it in one gulp, closed his eyes and savored the taste for a long time before nodding and praising, "Good wine, good wine." After 2 rounds of drinking, Fat Dragon and Cai Simon both dizzily went to the table. On the other hand, Xiongkahu had just started chatting with the soldiers. "You guys are called Special Forces now. At that time, we were all scouts. There was a name like Special Forces, but no one liked to use it." Xiongkahu laughed and said, "We are the kind of scouts that fly on the grass, appear at night, and quietly send you to hell." Hiwanjwa raised his cup and said with admiration, "Old man, you are a great hero. In our special forces, who hasn't heard of your name, Southwest's top 10 soldier kings, your military exploits are illustrious. Even now, you are our idol." Haha. Xiongkahu enjoyed it, but he still pretended to be humble and said, "This is all in the past. When I was young, my father told me about your deed. At that time, he also participated in that war. I heard that when he returned home, the general's mansion in South Yu country still had the incantation of your scouting unit pasted up. They were afraid that you would come out in the middle of the night and wipe them all out." Haha. Hiwanjwa reminisced with longing. "Your father was also a soldier? Which unit was he from?" Xiongkahu asked with interest. At that time, he was from the Southwest Military Region's 663 Brigade's 3rd Regiment's 1st Battalion. "You might not have heard of him." Hiwanjwa waved his hand and said, "At that time, my father was still young. He was just following the veterans to charge. Fortunately, he came back alive." Xiongkahu really hadn't heard of him, but he patted the table and said in an impassioned tone, "Your father was also a hero. War is about charging forward. Before the other side's cannonball is fired, he pees his pants. What's the point of fighting?" Xiongkahu probably didn't expect that He Jiuming, who he praised as a hero, was now the #1 officer in Yangcheng's military region. However, even if he knew, he wouldn't care. Rice wine was aged and the alcohol content was very high. Hiwanjwa also drank a lot. He raised his cup and shouted, "Old man is right. What's the point of fighting if he pees his pants? Charge! Charge!" Chapter 621. There wasn't a single soldier who couldn't drink. After drinking, they had to get completely drunk and even act like a drunkard. Hiwanjwa and the others were in such a state. Meng Sanhua was so drunk that he ran to the side to hug a tree and sing. Xiong San was sitting on the ground, holding a stool and mumbling something. The others were not doing so well. Even Hiwanjwa, who was usually steady, became a chatterbox, shaking his wine glass and talking non-stop. Xiong Kahu was rarely happy. He was drunk, which worried Poplar Fruit. After all, his master was almost 70 years old. However, Xiong Kahu was in good health. He did not make a fuss after getting drunk. He just sat there with a smile and looked down at everyone. He was usually serious, but now that he was drunk, he showed a bright smile. Poplar Fruit helped his master back to sleep. The rest of them were fine. Those who were not drunk were still playing finger-guessing games and drinking. Those who were drunk were left to play the sand on the ground for a while. After all, they would climb back to sleep when they sobered up. Looking at the untouched food, Poplar Fruit shook his head. The aging of the rice wine was really strong. They got into the mood so quickly that they did not even have time to eat 2 mouthfuls of food to suppress their drunkenness. Poplar Fruit did not eat much himself. At first, he was feeding Kiki, but when he turned around, they were all lying on the ground. "Then I won't stand on ceremony." Poplar Fruit laughed and ate heartily. He had a big appetite and liked to eat meat. On the mountain, he did not dare to eat too much at Xiongji's house. The few pieces of meat he had were given to the children first. So today was the most sumptuous meal he had since he came up the mountain. Da. Good times did not last long. Poplar Fruit heard a series of crisp footsteps. He did not need to turn around to know that his daughter had run back. "Aren't you going to play with your friends?" Poplar Fruit smiled and picked up a green vegetable with his chopsticks. He turned to Kiki and asked, "Do you want some vegetables?" Kiki pouted and shook her head. She still didn't like eating vegetables. She would only eat a little when her father forced her to eat. Now that her father was using a questioning tone, Kiki's choice was very decisive. "Stop pouting." Poplar Fruit put down his chopsticks and fiddled with Kiki's little mouth with his clean fingers. He smiled and said, "How many times have I told you? Be careful that you don't turn into a pig in the future." The moment he said this, the smug Chichi quickly pursed her lips. Kiki struggled to climb onto the chair next to her father. Unfortunately, the little guy was too short, and her obedient pad Gold was now hiding in the room with its tail between its legs. Kiki tried twice, but she still couldn't climb up. "What do you want to eat? Papa will get it for you. You don't have to climb up," Poplar Fruit said. He stopped Kiki, who didn't give up. This chair was different from the one at home. It wasn't stable. Even if Kiki climbed up, Poplar Fruit was worried that she wouldn't be able to sit steadily and fall down. "It stinks, it stinks." Kiki fanned her little hand in front of her nose and said with disgust, "Papa, let's go back and take a bath, okay?" The air was filled with a strong smell of alcohol, and the floor was stained with vomit. Even if the master's family cleaned it up in time, there was still a sour smell. Poplar Fruit was pulled by Kiki's clothes. Her urging voice rose and fell in his ears. He reluctantly looked at the big plate of pork and quickly took 2 more bites before regretfully putting down his chopsticks. "I'll take her back first." "Here." Poplar Fruit picked up Kiki and gestured to the master's son, Xiong who had been accompanying him. It's okay. You go back first." Xiong waved his hand and said with a smile, "We'll clean up here. Later, your friends will also be sent back to sleep. Don't worry." Poplar Fruit nodded at him and took his daughter back. On the way, Kiki yawned. She was a little sleepy. However, Kiki still hugged her father's neck and said, "Today, Sister Xiaolin and Kiki went to see Pleasant Goat. At noon, Goldie and brother Xiaofeng fought. Those uncles were so smelly. The little fellow liked to share her day's experiences with her father. Although there were many trivial things and many Poplar Fruit knew, Poplar Fruit was very patient and interested in listening to Kiki's narration. In fact, from Kiki's point of view and her naive understanding, many small stories were transformed into the warm laughter of a daughter and her father. The next day, Shionkahu didn't wake up early again. Poplar Fruit went to his master's house to ask. There was no problem. It was just that after getting drunk, the old man couldn't take it anymore and slept for 2 more hours. On the other hand, the people from the special forces woke up very early and didn't suffer from hangovers. They took a cold shower early in the morning and were full of energy again. On the other hand, Fat Dragon and Cai Simin, who drank the least, were still unconscious in the room. They slept like pigs. This was the first time that Fat Dragon could continue to sleep after 7 o'clock in the morning. Left kick. Poplar Fruit called softly. Screech. Chichi's cry sounded like it was real. Wrong. Poplar Fruit smiled and stopped. He came to his daughter's side and instructed, "This is the left leg. You kicked the right leg just now." Kiki blinked her big watery eyes and looked at her father's demonstration seriously. Then, she also lifted her left leg and kicked twice. Not bad. You've improved. Poplar Fruit smiled and applauded. After hearing her father's praise, Kiki practiced even more vigorously. She shouted valiantly and swung her fists and legs at the same time. She practiced the kung fu that her father taught her this morning. Okay, take a rest first. Drink some water. Poplar Fruit took Kiki's milk bottle from the side. It was filled with warm water. He opened the lid and handed it to Kiki. Chichi was panting heavily, her little face flushed red, and her neck was drenched in sweat. Kiki's long hair had been tied into a ponytail by Poplar Fruit. However, her fringe was still wet from the sweat and it curled into small curls and stuck to her forehead. Kiki took the milk bottle and sucked it in big mouthfuls. Poplar Fruit looked at her sympathetically. He even took Kiki's small towel and wiped the sweat off her neck and face. Looking at her father, Chichi smiled brilliantly while drinking water. Her smiling eyes were very beautiful, just like the white crescent moon that had yet to set on the horizon. Poplar Fruit did not appreciate it. He held Kiki's milk bottle and said, "You're still smiling when you're drinking water. Be careful not to choke." Wanjua, who had been watching from upstairs for a while, came down. He found a chance to interrupt and said with a smile, "Poplar Fruit, is this taekwondo?" Poplar Fruit turned around and greeted his brother. Then, he smiled and said, "No, I came up with it myself and taught it to Kiki like radio gymnastics. I was wondering, why does it look like it's not the same? You're a taekwondo expert. You can't possibly teach your child Korean things." Wanjua laughed. Chapter 622. Poplar Fruit, let's have a go. Wanjua shook his head as he watched Poplar Fruit and Kiki practicing soft children's martial arts. He waited until Poplar Fruit and the others finished before he walked up. What? I should be the one to practice with Poplar Fruit. Meng Sanhua had been itching for a fight. He ran in front of Wanjua and cut in line. Hey, martial maniac Meng, first come first serve, don't you understand? Wanjua patted Meng Sanhua's shoulder unhappily and motioned him to stand aside. You're not following the rules. Go do 100 push-ups next to me. Meng Sanhua did not flinch at all. He smiled and said, "Hey, Captain, we're not in the army now. Do you think I can't control you when we're not in the army?" Wanjua glared and said angrily, "You have to be able to beat Poplar Fruit first." Meng Sanhua said unhappily, "I let you go first, but you can't beat him. Aren't you asking for trouble?" "I can't beat him, but you can." Wanjua said unhappily, "Didn't you get beaten up last time? You're the pot calling the kettle black. How can I lose every time?" Meng Sanhua rolled up his sleeves and said, "Captain, you've seen it. Every time I go back, I sum up my experience and practice hard. A scholar who has been away for 3 days should be looked at with new eyes. I haven't seen you for 2 months and I've improved a lot. This time, it's hard to say who will win. Isn't that what you say every time?" Wanjua sneered. "You still get beaten up in the end, don't you? The two were arguing over the order. Poplar Fruit smiled bitterly and went up to stop them. Hey, that's enough. Brothers, don't argue. What's there to argue about? Big brother, he came early. I'll walk 2 rounds with him first and then fight with brother Sanhua. Don't worry. As long as you have time, you can use me as a punching bag, Poplar Fruit said with a smile. Poplar Fruit, don't you want to send your daughter back? Meng Sanhua did not insist. He walked to the side and made room for Poplar Fruit and Hiwanjua. Seeing Kiki holding her milk bottle and blinking her eyes, Meng Sanhua asked curiously. According to his understanding, although it was just a show of kung fu, it was still a real fight. It might not be as fresh as the fighting scenes in the movies. Anyway, it was not good to let the children see a fight, right? Yang Guo turned around and looked down at her daughter. Shishi looked at her father. She loosened her mouth that was biting the pacifier, shook her head, and said crisply, Papa, I want to see. You're a kid. Don't watch it. Meng Sanhua seemed to be jealous because Kiki exposed that he was defeated by Poplar Fruit. He smiled and walked over to pick up Kiki. Go play with the other children. I'll buy you some candy later. I don't believe you. Kiki stuck her tongue out at him and made a face. Then she turned around and ran out of Meng Sanhua's reach. Just now, when Yang Guo was teaching Chichi martial arts, there were a few children from the Hong Stockade village who were looking at them in a daze. Chichi immediately went to their side. There was also a particularly attentive little boy who brought a small stool from the house for Chichi. The others didn't like cleanliness like Chichi, so they just sat cross-legged on the ground. Kiki, take your brother and sister to sit away. Don't get too close. Poplar Fruit did not drive his daughter away. He did not think it was a big deal. Instead, he kindly asked Kiki and the others to sit away from the place that might be affected. There's a little audience. It seems that I have to be more serious today. Hiwanjua laughed. I can't lose too badly. He knew that he could not beat Poplar Fruit, so he did not say that he would definitely win. However, Hiwanjua said that he had to be more serious. In fact, every time he fought with Poplar Fruit, he was 100% focused. Hiwanjua took a step back with his right leg, then clenched his fists and raised them slightly below his chin. He assumed a classic fighting stance and looked at Yang Guo with a solemn expression. Meng Sanhua shook his head and looked at his watch. He muttered, 30 seconds. Meng Sanhua had overestimated Hiwanjua. Poplar Fruit was getting stronger and stronger. Hiwanjua was hit by Poplar Fruit's right leg in 10 seconds. If Poplar Fruit did not save some strength in the second punch and supported Hiwanjua, Hiwanjua would have been put down cleanly. Hiwanjua struggled for a bit before cupping his hands and admitting defeat in the end. Hiwanjua didn't ask for anything else since he wasn't defeated too badly by a one-hit KO. What are you looking at? I guarantee that you won't be any better. Hiwanjua was very dissatisfied with Meng Sanhua's mocking expression. He snorted at Meng Sanhua and walked out of the field. Mr. Yang is so good. A group of Hong village children who did not know anything applauded. This is my papa. Kiki turned around and said proudly to her brothers and sisters. Meng Sanhua took Hiwanjua's place and walked into the field. He twisted his arm and suddenly turned over like a swallow. His right leg swung in the air and smashed heavily on the bluestone of the village, creating a layer of dust. This guy did not forget to play cool even when he was warming up. Wow! The surrounding children exclaimed. Even Xiong Jisha, the best kung fu practitioner of the younger generation in Xiong village, was surprised. Hiwanjua's kung fu was not bad. He was a master of firearms and a master tactician. He could fight with ordinary soldiers. But in the eyes of a real expert, his kung fu was mediocre. Meng Sanhua, on the other hand, was different. Not only was his kick flashy, it was also fast and powerful. It was not something an ordinary person could do. Xiong Jisha could tell how good Meng Sanhua was as soon as he made a move. He must be a master. Meng Sanhua's performance later confirmed his guess. Ho ho ho! Meng Sanhua shouted hurriedly. Following his rhythm was his thigh, which was like the legendary shadowless kick. It was so fast that it turned into a shadow in the eyes of the audience. Bang bang bang! Each of Meng Sanhua's kicks landed on Poplar Fruit's palm. The hard leg bones and the fleshy palm made the sound of a stick hitting leather. Xiong Jisha watched seriously. He felt that if he were in Meng Sanhua's place, he would not be able to withstand Meng Sanhua's powerful kicks. He would be defeated within 2 moves. It was not that he wanted to be beaten, but Meng Sanhua's kicks were too fast. Even if he faced them, he would not be able to dodge them. Of course, the premise was that both of them were bare-handed. If he had a Miaodao, Xiong Jisha felt that even 2 Meng Sanhuos would not be his match. That was also nonsense. A body of flesh and blood would definitely not be able to withstand a sharp blade. Please vote for me. Please recommend me. Chapter 623. For the past 2 months, Meng Sanhua had been thinking about how to deal with Poplar Fruit. His strength was far inferior to Poplar Fruit's, and his Tan Tui might not be able to beat Poplar Fruit's Taiji Fist in terms of moves. The only thing he thought he had a chance of winning was the speed of his kicks. 8 steps meteor kick was not as good as Tan Tui in terms of training methods. Poplar Fruit might be considered someone who knew leg techniques, but he was still a little weaker than Meng Sanhua. Therefore, Meng Sanhua took the initiative to attack, forcing Poplar Fruit to follow his pace. If Poplar Fruit remained passive and defenseless, Meng Sanhua believed he would be able to find a flaw in Poplar Fruit's defense. Only Meng Sanhua would use Mind's Eye when sparring with a friend. It was not that he was competitive, but he had always believed that there should be differences in martial arts. There was no such thing as a tie. How could there be a difference? You lose, and I win. Or, to put it more extreme, you die, and I live. This saying was especially applicable on the battlefield. War was cruel, and there was no right or wrong. The winner was king, and the loser was a bandit. If you wanted to live, you had to kill your opponent first. Therefore, no matter what moves you used on the battlefield, it was not despicable to stab your opponent's eyes in the crotch. Killing your opponent was the way to go. Meng Sanhua applied this principle to real life. Of course, he would not stab his opponent's eyes in the crotch. However, he was willing to use some psychological tactics to win the competition. Sometimes, he went overboard. For example, right now, he was very fierce towards Poplar Fruit, as if he wanted to overwhelm his opponent with his aura. That's too much. He Wonjua had spent a lot of time with Meng Sanhua and knew what he was thinking. However, there was a group of children nearby. He hesitated and reminded him. At this moment, Meng Sanhua was immersed in the world of martial arts and could not hear what he Wonjua was saying. Unknowingly, Big Bear, Bear 2, and Bear 3 had woken up. Together with Yin Liuqing, who had her arms crossed, they stood upstairs to watch the match between Poplar Fruit and Meng Sanhua. If Meng Sanhua had made progress, how could Poplar Fruit remain stagnant? Just as Meng Sanhua thought, he was caught off guard by the unexpected attack. Poplar Fruit lacked combat experience. He had never seen a friend like Meng Sanhua, who attacked without greeting. His kicks were like a storm. Meng Sanhua thought that other than this reason, his pretense of being aggressive also worked. However, he was really thinking too much. Poplar Fruit was a man who was indifferent to Xiong Kahu's murderous aura. How could he be frightened by a child's play? Poplar Fruit saw Meng Sanhua's grin and wondered why he was so enthusiastic. Come on, Papa, come on. Kiki's soft cheers came from behind. Chichi, on the other hand, didn't have the eyesight to see who was better and who was worse. She simply felt that she should call out to her father at this time. Yes, Papa, fighting. Meng Sanhua could not hear anything at this moment. In his eyes, the world was black and white. Only Poplar Fruit, who was twisting left and right, was alive and the only existence in front of him. He was the kind of person who became more and more excited the more he fought. He felt that he had a great advantage against Poplar Fruit, which stimulated his competitive spirit. He felt that all the cells in his body were violently trembling, cheering, and looking forward to victory. No need to wait. I'll beat you. Meng Sanhua's eyes lit up. He had made another breakthrough in the fight. The obvious sign was that his leg speed had increased again, and his strength had increased a lot. It's okay. It's still acceptable. If Meng Sanhua could hear Poplar Fruit's thoughts, he might have spat out blood. How could it be okay? After the initial uncomfortable period, Poplar Fruit felt that he could handle it with ease. Although Meng Sanhua's leg speed was fast, Poplar Fruit's reaction speed was faster. In his eyes, Meng Sanhua was like a slow-motion movie that was slightly sped up. He could see the trajectory of Meng Sanhua's leg and easily slapped it away with his palm. Hearing his daughter's cry, Poplar Fruit did not turn his head, but he was happy. His daughter was not bad. She even knew how to support her father. Well, since his daughter had expressed her support, he could not be so embarrassed. At least, the counterattack had begun. Poplar Fruit suddenly withdrew his hands that had been blocking. He lowered his shoulders, bent his waist, and raised his head to dodge Meng Sanhua's right leg. Meng Sanhua reacted quickly. His right leg stopped in mid-air for a third of a second, and then suddenly chopped down. The hard heel hit Poplar Fruit's shoulder. Yang Guo had already guessed it. He exerted force on his waist and maintained his dodging posture. Strangely, he did a 180-degree lateral roll in the air. His head was up, and his legs that were on the ground also flipped into the air. Meng Sanhua's leg was just dodged by Poplar Fruit, and he landed heavily on the ground. Poplar Fruit pressed his hands on the ground and did another 180-degree flip. He easily flipped over and stood up. This time, Poplar Fruit would not give Meng Sanhua a chance to attack. As soon as he stood up, he swept his leg over with the top of his foot, as if he was kicking a soccer ball. Meng Sanhua had just stood up when Poplar Fruit's leg came. He did not have the same reaction speed as Poplar Fruit, so he had to raise his hands and take Poplar Fruit's kick. Fuck! Meng Sanhua felt a huge force on his arm. He could not take it and had to take 2 steps back. For the sake of their friendship, Yang Guo only hit Meng Sanhua across the mountain. Meng Sanhua was bounced back by Yang Guo's strength. He didn't use his leg to meet force with force. Otherwise, Meng Sanhua's arm would have been broken. Before Meng Sanhua could regain his balance, Poplar Fruit pounced on him and wrapped his right arm around Meng Sanhua's neck. Then, he sneakily stuck one foot behind Meng Sanhua and threw him to the ground in a wrestling position. Meng Sanhua was thrown to the ground by Poplar Fruit before he could react. KO. Lost again. Meng Sanhua closed his eyes, not because of the pain, but because he regretted losing to Poplar Fruit again. Poplar Fruit knew that the guy was fine. He pulled Meng Sanhua up from the ground and then turned around to accept the cheers of Kiki and her friends. The kids were so excited that they screamed as if they had defeated a great demon. In fact, Poplar Fruit's finishing move was a bit too fancy. There was no need to wrestle. Just like Meng Sanhua's opening move, he was just acting cool. Chapter 624. Poplar Fruit's fight was so loud that it attracted the attention of many villagers. At this time, because everyone had just woken up, the construction of the school had not started so early. Many young and strong people of the Hong village also gathered around. In addition to Poplar Fruit and Meng Sanhua's fight, Xiong Da and Xiong were also interested. The 2 big men ran to the middle of the field and performed wrestling for everyone. It was called a performance because the 2 guys did not use their martial arts. It was purely a competition of strength. However, this kind of competition of strength still received a lot of applause. Everyone liked to see the 2 big men twisting into a ball. Their fists hit the flesh, but they did not cry out in pain. Their feet poked the ground, shaking the earth and mountains. They were even more imposing than Poplar Fruit's fight. In the end, Xiong was hugged and fell by Xiong Da. He was not angry. He stood up with Xiong Da, cupped his hands and thanked everyone happily. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. It was like a street performer. Uncle Jisha, come on. Uncle Jisha, come on. Quite a few Xiong village boys around the age of 10 started to shout. Under their lead, a group of little brats also started to shout along, and even Chichi was giggling as she shouted. Xiong Jisha was only 10 years older than them, but his seniority was there, so he was called uncle. His Miaodao was the best among the younger generation. Xiong Kehu planned to teach him the technique of 2-handed Miaodao when Xiong Jisha was older. Although he did not learn the technique of 2-handed Miaodao, Xiong Miaodao skill was not bad. At least in the eyes of the children who practiced with him, he was an idol who could be super awesome in 10 minutes. Xiong scratched his head and finally pushed himself out. He hesitated and said, "Only me. It's not good to play with a knife alone." He still wanted to find an opponent, but none of the children of Xiong village present could beat him. They all knew that they were not strong enough to fight him. Xiong had to turn to Poplar Fruit, who was holding Kiki, and said honestly, "Brother Yang, let's have a try." Xiong took the unsharpened Miaodao used for practice from the hands of the few jumping children and looked at Yang Guo anxiously. "Okay." Poplar Fruit smiled, put down Kiki and walked up. His knife was still in the room, and it was not suitable to be used here. Poplar Fruit was not afraid of hurting Xiong, but he was worried that some reckless child would accidentally touch it. Yang Guo took a Miaodao from Xiong hand and weighed it in his hand. He felt that it was a little uncomfortable. It wasn't that he didn't recognize the knife, but he felt that this knife was too light. It was no different from holding a bamboo as thick as a finger. "Do you have a heavier one?" Poplar Fruit asked, but they all shook their heads. Poplar Fruit had to give up. This time, Poplar Fruit did not bully Xiong. Like Xiong, he only held a Miaodao and stood facing each other. He had no interest in the fight between the two barbarians. Yin Liuqing, who was a little sleepy, saw Poplar Fruit and the young man from Miao standing on the field with a knife in his hand. He suddenly became energetic. With his eyes wide open, Yin Liuqing grabbed the railing on the second floor and watched with rapt attention. Dang dang. There were no fancy knife moves. Xiong and Poplar Fruit waved their Miaodao and knocked it against each other. The dense sounds of blades colliding seemed to be strung together into a beautiful symphony. At this time, there was little meaning in competing. Moreover, Xiong also knew that he was no match for Poplar Fruit. With so many people watching, everyone wanted to have fun. Therefore, the Miaodao competition between Poplar Fruit and Xiong was more like an exhibition match. Knife techniques were different from sword techniques. There were not so many delicate moves in knife techniques. Even straight thrusts and diagonal thrusts were rare. Slashing, chopping, and flipping moves were the main characters. Therefore, the Miaodao duel was less gorgeous and more concise. In addition to reaction speed and moves, there was also strength and adaptability. Therefore, although Poplar Fruit and Xiong were performing, this kind of excitement was similar to the real fight between Poplar Fruit and Meng Sanhua. Too slow. Boring. Meng Sanhua curled his lips and shook his head as he said to Hiwanjua. Seeing Poplar Fruit go on stage again, his hands were itching again. Hiwanjua ignored him. He and the Miao people cheered and applauded Poplar Fruit and the young Miao man. Interesting. Yin Liuqing, who had not come down from the second floor, did not cheer and applaud, nor did he complain like Meng Sanhua. Instead, he nodded with interest. The layman watched the show, while the expert watched the skill. Yin Liuqing was an expert in using knives. Moreover, Poplar Fruit and Xiong were moving so slowly. Naturally, he could see the Miaodao moves. The speed of the knife is uniform, the footwork is steady, and the focus is mostly on the front part of the blade. This was similar to what Yin Liuqing knew before. If that's all, then it can't beat my Padao. Yin Liuqing's Padao Kung Fu was passed down in his family. The Padao was characterized by compact movements and a clear rhythm. It was not like the Miaodao where its speed fluctuated greatly. Yin Liuqing was very confident in his swordsmanship. Moreover, after actual combat training, he had long surpassed his master. This time, he came because of old master Xiong. He wanted to see the king of swords who had the best swordsmanship among the 10 soldier kings of the southwest. It's a pity that the old master drank too much yesterday and hasn't woken up yet. Yin Liuqing felt a little regretful. He looked around at the onlookers below and did not see Xiong. Yin Liuqing knew that Poplar Fruit and Xiong must have gone easy on them. However, Yin Liuqing felt that Poplar Fruit had only learned swordsmanship from old master Xiong for less than half a month. No matter how good he was, he could not be that good. He still wanted to wait until old master Xiong woke up to ask for advice. However, He did not realize that Poplar Fruit was a monster who had the strength of a master in less than 2 years of practicing martial arts. Even if he had only learned swordsmanship for less than half a month, Poplar Fruit's two-handed Miaodao now had the strength to fight with Old Master Xiong Kahu. Yin Liuqing saw that Poplar Fruit, who was waving his Miaodao slowly in the field, was not even 1/10 of Poplar Fruit's real two-handed Miaodao. If he knew, he probably could not help but run down and pester Poplar Fruit to spar. While he was thinking, Yang Guo and Xiong Jisha's fight also came to an end. The two of them didn't have a clear winner, but in the end, they clashed their sabers against each other with cupped fists. Good. Good. Other than Meng Sanhua, who felt very bored, Xiong Da and Xiong are all applauded. The happiest and most excited were the children of Xiong village. The Miaodao was the symbol of Xiong village in their hearts. Seeing the wonderful performance of the Miaodao, they all proudly puffed out their little chests and cheered. It was early in the morning. Perhaps the people of Miao village were just watching the competition of martial arts for fun. However, who would have thought that the strength and beauty of Chinese martial arts had already sown the seeds of spring in these children's hearts? These seeds would really take root and sprout one day in the future. Chapter 625. Open all these boxes. Fellow countrymen, let me tell you, this cable is wrong. You have to buy it again. The power is too low. When so many computers are turned on, it will definitely burn the fuse. You have to buy it. After Cai Simin woke up, the ancestral hall became lively. Several agile women were arranged to help him. Cai Simin struck while the iron was hot. He first opened all the computers and checked them one by one. Fat Dragon also got up from the bed and happily followed behind this buddy. He looked at him as if he was watching a monkey show. In fact, the two of them had been friends for a long time. They chatted very enthusiastically on the internet. If it weren't for the fact that they were drunk yesterday, the two technical geeks would probably have a long talk. Cai Simin was 1.8 meters tall and thin. Under his big old-fashioned black-rimmed glasses, there were heavy bags. His palms were thick, and his knuckles were full of thick calluses. Fat Dragon and him were two completely different types. Fat Dragon was a typical southerner. He was short, and his white and fat body was more than 100 pounds. When the two of them stood together, all the characteristics of a human's body were included. Fat Dragon, get out of my way. You are a technical staff, a typical coding farmer. What are you doing here? Cai Simin moved a computer over and was about to test it under the desk lamp. When he turned around, he saw Fat Dragon standing there like a ghost and said angrily, "You can't leave me alone." "Hehe, I'm just looking to see if there's anyone who needs my help," Fat Dragon said with a smile. "But I don't like what you said. What do you mean by I'm a coding farmer? I'm the best hacker in China in the 21st century. After saying that, Fat Dragon felt that his tone was a bit arrogant, so he added, "Well, one of them." "One of them?" Cai Simin sneered. "You verified it yourself, right?" He finally understood why a genius like Cai Simin would fail in business again and again. His temper was as if he had eaten gunpowder. "At least it's better than you." Fat Dragon rolled his eyes and said, "Do you know how many loopholes there are in your comet system? It's bloated and not easy to use. If I were to write it, I could at least save half of the memory space." "You." Cai Simin was a little angry. He threw off the canvas cap on his head and said angrily, "Your phone is designed like a brick. It's too heavy to hold in your hand, and you're afraid of hitting the flowers and plants when you throw it out. I really don't understand why someone would make such a stupid design." Originally, this sentence was very hurtful, but it just so happened to poke Fat Dragon's itch. Instead of getting angry, he actually laughed. He took out his precious brick phone, shamelessly moved forward, and said with a smile, "Brother Cai, you're right. I'm not as good as you when it comes to hardware. Can you help me take a look? See if there's anything that can be improved?" Cai Simin's expression eased up a lot, but her tone was still foul. Wait a moment, I'll let you have a look after I check this one." Fat Dragon was watching from the side. He rolled his eyes and said with a smile, "Brother Cai, I have a suggestion. Would you like to hear it?" He actually used honorifics. Cai Simon didn't notice the change in tone. His hands deftly dismantled the computer's screws while he asked without raising his head, "What suggestion?" "Brother Cai, you're really not doing well in Beijing. You still live in a basement. You won't be able to become Steve Jobs in another 10 years. Fat Dragon didn't wait for Cai Simon to lose his temper. He immediately said, "Why don't you come to Guangdong province? With your skills and my brain, your company will definitely be popular." "You say it as if I don't have a brain," Cai Simon murmured to himself. However, he didn't become angry this time because the Fat Dragon was right. Fat Dragon was the leader of the hacker team for a few years. At that time, there were only 3 or 4 people in the team. Later, he roped in like-minded friends one by one from home and abroad. Only then did it grow to the size of 7 or 8 people today. This also made Fat Dragon develop a strange habit. When he sees talents, he wants to take them into his harem, into his company. Cai Simon shook his head and said with some pride, "You're late. I'm now taken." Originally, after Zheng Yujie returned to Beijing, she wanted to cut off any possible patent disputes in the future. So, she went to Cai Simon and bought his Comet system and computer patent. Later, Zheng Yujie thought about it again. It was also important to maintain the quality of the follow-up service. Otherwise, if there were any problems with the computers on Poplar Fruit Mountain, they wouldn't be able to find someone to fix it. Zheng Yujie simply asked her aunt for a shell company specializing in electronic products and signed Cai Simon under it. "What kind of treatment did she give you?" Fat Dragon asked with interest. It wasn't that he wanted to poach, it was purely out of curiosity. Facing Queen Zhang, who only smiled in front of Poplar Fruit, if Fat Dragon dared to pick up a hoe, he would really be looking for death. Including food and accommodation, 10,000 yuan a month, double salary at the end of the year, and performance. Cai Simon put down the screwdriver in his hand and patted his chest with a smile. "The most important thing is that I have Beijing's household registration." People who have never drifted in Beijing would find it hard to understand the importance of Beijing's household registration in the eyes of Beijing drifters. With Beijing's household registration, it was equivalent to half a real estate certificate. Cai Simon, a high school dropout who was living in a dark basement in Zhongguancun, turned around and became someone with a house, a car, and a household registration. Although the house was a company-provided dorm and the car was a small van that was parked in the underground parking lot most of the time, at least it gave Cai Simon the hope of becoming the owner. "What position do you have? Does your company still want to hire? With such good treatment, I'll go too." Fat Dragon laughed and said. He was just teasing Cai Simon. He didn't think that 10,000 yuan a month was that high in Beijing. "I'm the technical director. If you want to come, I'll give you the position of deputy director. Of course, the probation period is 3 months. In these 3 months, you have to start from the bottom." Cai Simon crossed his legs and sat like a boss, leaning back on the rocking chair and said, "Come on, technical director." Fat Dragon curled his lips and exposed him without holding back. "In the whole company, other than the boss, you're the only one, right?" Cai Simon opened his eyes wide and wanted to refute, but he was immediately discouraged. He was indeed a lone commander now, and Zheng Yujie hadn't told him any development plans. It was still far from being able to recruit soldiers. "Right now, it's just me, but it will definitely get better in the future." Cai Simon straightened his neck and said dryly. Cai Simon didn't know that when Zheng Yujie signed him, it wasn't to train him to be Steve Jobs. Zheng Yujie just wanted him to assist Poplar Fruit and do a good job. It was purely an act to please her lover. However, this wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Cai Simon didn't think that what he was doing now would be so great. Chapter 626. After Xiong Kahu woke up, he walked around the ancestral hall, feeling uneasy. On the way, he saw the board he Wunjua leading the soldiers from the Special Forces training in the village's martial arts field, attracting the attention of a group of hot-blooded Miao children. Xiong Kahu had heard that Poplar Fruit and the others had a few exhibition matches in the open space in the village's center early in the morning. Of course, He wasn't unhappy because of their noise. On the contrary, Xiongkahu gave them a thumbs up in his heart. In the current society, literature was flourishing while martial arts were declining. However, in Xiongkahu's heart, although knowledge was important, one still needed a strong fist to conquer the world and protect their homeland. Nowadays, the children in the village were not very willing to practice martial arts. Their parents would also whisper in private, saying that they couldn't find a job if they learned martial arts. Only by studying would they have a way out. This left Xiongkahu with no choice but to sit quietly in the ancestral hall and drink. There weren't many who were willing to learn martial arts, and Xiongjisha was the tallest among the short ones. There was no successor, but there was nothing he could do. After all, this was the trend of the times. Thinking of this, Xiongkahu suddenly thought of Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit's talent in martial arts was the highest he had ever seen. In the past, he would be a genius that was hard to come by in 100 years. In the beginning, Xiongkahu didn't want to impart all his martial arts to Poplar Fruit because of his sectarian bias, even though he was Xiong Village's benefactor. However, Poplar Fruit's talent reignited his hope in martial arts. Poplar Fruit learned quickly, so Xiongkahu taught him everything without hesitation. He wanted to see where Poplar Fruit's limit was. In less than half a month, Poplar Fruit had already learned how to use a two-handed miaodao. It could be said that other than experience, which Xiongkahu couldn't teach, all his martial arts knowledge had been taken away by Poplar Fruit. Of course, Poplar Fruit's ability to learn so quickly was also related to his own martial arts foundation. However, Xiongkahu could really see Poplar Fruit's passion and dedication towards martial art. To be able to wake up at 5 o'clock every morning to practice martial arts, such a person would be hard to find in modern society, right? There was no need to say that perseverance would lead to victory, but paranoia was definitely extraordinary. Thinking about Kobe Bryant of the NBA, although his reputation was not good, his 5 championships were not for nothing. He even woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning to practice basketball before Poplar Fruit. Only with a fanatical love and obsession with basketball could he achieve his glory. Xiongkahu didn't know who Kobe was, but Xiongkahu believed that Poplar Fruit would reach a peak in martial arts that even he couldn't reach. Poplar Fruit, who was being nagged by his master, was not on the mountain at this time. He was following behind his daughter, and the two slowly walked down the mountain. Be careful, raise your feet. The road ahead is slippery. Come, hold Daddy's hand. 1, 2, 3, jump. Poplar Fruit was like a pair of white wings behind Kiki's back, gentle and warm, always protecting Kiki, not leaving even half a step. Hee. As Chichi walked down the mountain path, it was as if Alice had barged into a fairyland. Every step was an endlessly interesting adventure. Like a princess, she gently placed a hand on her father's palm and jumped up and down. Her bell-like laughter resounded throughout the mountain forest and combined with the cicadas' cries in the scorching summer to form a gentle melody. Are you tired? Do you want Daddy to carry you? Poplar Fruit saw fine beads of sweat on the tip of his daughter's tender nose. He took out a small towel to wipe her and then asked. Kiki shook her head, slightly panting, and then firmly pointed down the mountain and said, No, Kiki wants to walk down the mountain by herself. Kiki's physical strength was very good, better than most children under the age of 5. Poplar Fruit already knew this, and he guessed that it might be related to the internal strength that he had left in Kiki's body. Not long ago, Poplar Fruit checked Kiki's body, and now the internal strength in Kiki's body was automatically circulating. Although it was a little slow, there was still a lot of progress. Therefore, Poplar Fruit wasn't too worried, and continued to walk down the mountain with his daughter. The reason why Poplar Fruit wanted to go down the mountain was because Meng Ping, the bureau chief, was coming. Calling him bureau chief wasn't a joke. Meng Ping really became the bureau chief. 2 days ago, the storm in Lidong County's officialdom affected too many people. From top to bottom, almost everyone was fired. Even the first and second in command of Lidong County, who didn't seem to be involved in Liang Shengtao's accounts, were fired. Although they didn't take off their official titles, they were transferred to a leisurely department like the Municipal Bureau of Agriculture, and their fates weren't any better. The Education Bureau was also hit hard. Other than Meng Ping, all the bureau chiefs and deputy bureau chiefs were investigated, and thus, the Education Bureau was in a difficult situation. The storm in Lidong County started from the internet, so even though it was a small place, it still attracted a lot of attention. Meng Ping's backer naturally noticed it, and he was still hesitating whether or not to save Meng Ping. In the end, he saw that teacher Meng's child was unharmed. Not only was he unharmed, but after the bureau chief and deputy bureau chief were all investigated, Meng Ping became the only one who stood out. Meng Ping's backer saw this situation and was happy. This child was really giving his uncle face. Since this was the case, he might as well help Meng Ping again. At this moment, it was much easier for him to help Meng Ping. All he needed to do was say a word, and his subordinates would approve it. After all, Lidong County lacked grassroots officials at this time. If not for Meng Ping's lack of qualifications, he might even have been a deputy county head. Now, no one was willing to go to a place like the Education Bureau. Since Meng Ping wanted to be a bureau chief, he would be given the position. Hence, Meng Ping was made a bureau chief. Of course, it was only a temporary position, but anyone could tell that once the new county head was confirmed, it was only a matter of time before he was promoted. At the beginning, there was a flurry of discussion in the bureau. Teacher Meng actually jumped 3 ranks in 2 years. There must be an inside story. But so what if there was an inside story? Meng Ping was someone that everyone trusted. He was diligent in his work and was a clean official. Although he had a weird temper, he was much more amiable than the arrogant and despotic parasites. However, Meng Ping wasn't an amiable person. On the first day he became a temporary bureau chief, he announced that the Audit Bureau would conduct an audit of the Education Bureau's accounts. He was determined to catch all the staff that had embezzled the funds for aiding the poor. Just as everyone was waiting for the audit in fear, Meng Ping drove to the Xiong family village. He still remembered the matter that Poplar Fruit had asked him to do. Now, it was his turn to make the decision. Meng Ping decided to first do an on-site investigation. Even if they were comrades in the same trench, Meng Ping wouldn't easily let Poplar Fruit use the funds for aiding the poor. Meng Ping still remembered the call that uncle gave him the night before. Meng Ping, you have to remember. No matter what you do, don't let your father's reputation be tarnished. Chapter 627. When they arrived at the foot of the mountain, Meng Ping was already waiting for them at the store. Xiong Jijiu recognized him. He was the son of Teacher Meng. Although he had only been here once before, and it was when they took Teacher Meng's body down the mountain, everyone remembered how he lost control of his emotions and shouted. After greeting them, the car was left at the store, and Poplar Fruit took Meng Ping up the mountain. Meng Ping had the personality of a scholar, and he walked up the mountain empty-handed. He actually stopped to rest 3 times while panting. Kiki curiously asked her father secretly, "Papa, why is uncle so tired?" Kiki is not tired even when she goes down the mountain. When they went up the mountain, Poplar Fruit held Kiki in his arms and did not let her climb up. Poplar Fruit originally wanted to hurry, but he found that Meng Ping was the one who slowed everyone down. Kiki's voice was very soft, and she was almost whispering in her father's ear. However, Poplar Fruit happened to be standing in the wind, and when the breeze blew, Meng Ping heard her voice. He would not lose his temper with the child. Meng Ping smiled, shook his head and said, "I'm old, there's nothing I can do." Poplar Fruit rolled his eyes and complained in his heart, "You obviously don't exercise, and you're saying that you're old when you're less than 50 years old. What an excuse." In any case, Meng Ping arrived at Xiong village at noon. He was not picky when eating. Although he had lived a rich life for a long time, he did not forget his original intention. "This is the school. Now I plan to renovate it and install a safer circuit and improve anti-theft measures." Xiong Kahu was not interested in taking Meng Ping around, so Poplar Fruit led Meng Ping to the front of the school and pointed at the busy construction site. Meng Ping had been here once before, and at that time, he hated this place where his father could not get up. However, looking back now, he felt more and more sad. After all, this was the school of Miao Village that his father had worked hard for decades. That was the place that he dreamed of even when he was lying in a hospital bed, even after he retired. But now, things were still the same, but the people had changed. No, that's not right. A few walls of that old-fashioned school had been torn down, and they were preparing to rebuild it. Perhaps the next time he came here, it would look completely different. Meng Ping said somewhat sourly, "Don't delay the children's studies by causing so much trouble." Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "No, the project is expected to be completed in about 10 days. Take me to see that long-distance education you mentioned." Meng Ping was afraid that he would think of someone when he saw it, so he waved his hand and said. Although the equipment was tested in the Xiong family before, Yang Guo went to the ancestral hall first. Because Fat Dragon and the others were still there, he had to find someone to help him adjust the equipment. Yang Guo had no choice but to go to the ancestral hall first. Since Fat Dragon and the others were there, he had to find someone to help adjust the equipment. Raise it higher. Yes, it's about this height. As soon as he walked in, Poplar Fruit heard Cai Simon shouting. When he walked in, he saw that Cai Simon was instructing a few agile Miao women to help hang up the projector. "What are you doing?" Poplar Fruit asked curiously. "Why are you installing the projector now? Aren't you going to install it after the school is built? Besides, you've messed up the ancestral hall. Don't break the plaque, or my master will come after you with a knife." Fat Dragon was holding the ladder at the side. He turned his head and smiled. "We can't wait for the school. Let's try it here first. Isn't it good at home? Why do you have to choose the ancestral hall?" Poplar Fruit asked. "Isn't the place big?" Fat Dragon smiled and said, "I took a look. It can fit at least 50 to 60 computers, and it can all be adjusted in less than 2 days. We don't have to wait for the school to be built." Uncle Xiong also agreed. Cai Simin added. Uncle Xiong was referring to Xiong Kahu. Since his master didn't have any objections, Poplar Fruit didn't say anything else. Because they needed to connect all kinds of wires, Poplar Fruit was worried that Kiki would run around and cause problems, so he carried Kiki out and asked Xiong Xiaolin to take her back for a nap. "I remember you told me that you don't have a teacher for this distance education?" Meng Ping asked with a frown. It was too messy inside, so he and Poplar Fruit stood outside the ancestral hall to talk. They also acted as the door guards to stop the naughty boys from peeping. "Of course there must be a teacher. How can we do it without a teacher?" Poplar Fruit laughed and said, "However, it's still different from traditional education. Our teacher won't stand here, but through cameras and the internet, teaching children in big cities hundreds of kilometers away. The advantage is that we can attract more people to participate. I plan to make it a charity event." Poplar Fruit opened his mouth and was ready to talk about his ideas. However, Meng Ping didn't give him any face and directly interrupted. "I remember that you're a professor? Or a university student?" Poplar Fruit honestly said, "I'm not a professor. I'm currently a teaching assistant in the school. I'm studying for a master's degree. That's why I said that your idea is wrong." Meng Ping shook his head and said without any trace of politeness, "How can you apply the education concept of a university to an elementary school student? University is a free-range education. Those students already have a certain level of self-control. You don't have to care too much about them. They can learn on their own. However, elementary school students are like sheep. They don't know anything. If you let them loose without a leader watching over them, will they be willing to learn on their own?" Meng Ping said, "The leader I'm talking about is a teacher." Meng Ping became more and more enthusiastic as he spoke. He summarized his previous teaching experience, giving examples and reasoning in an attempt to convince Poplar Fruit. "Look, if you don't keep an eye on a middle school student, he will dare to climb over the wall to go online in the middle of the night. The self-control of an elementary school student is even weaker. If you put a computer in front of him, do you think that he will still listen to your lesson?" Meng Ping's tone had a hint of disappointment. "Don't think that you university students can tell a few good stories, play some good movies, and play some fancy slides. That's called a lesson. That's not called a lesson. That's called misleading the students. Do you know that?" When Meng Ping was agitated, he never cared if he was speaking too directly and could easily hurt others. Fortunately, Poplar Fruit's temper was good. Poplar Fruit waited for him to catch his breath before he had the chance to interrupt. He smiled and said, "Uncle Meng, don't get agitated. The distance education that I want to do isn't as simple as playing movies. Education must be based on imparting knowledge. As for the problems that you mentioned, I have also considered them. I think that we have to look at it from 2 points." Poplar Fruit stretched out 2 fingers. One is the motivation to learn, and the other is the management of the students. As long as these 2 points are done well, I believe that even if it's a distance education, it won't be inferior to a face-to-face teacher teaching. Chapter 628. Poplar Fruit had mentioned the motivation to learn before, so as soon as Poplar Fruit finished speaking, Meng Ping raised his voice and retorted, "I know what you mean by motivation to learn. I've said it before. It's just a foreign monk who knows how to ring the bell," Meng Ping said with some dissatisfaction. "But if you think that the university students in the city can afford the education of so many children, I can tell you directly that you are too naive." That's right. In the beginning, the university students in the city are more knowledgeable and their lectures are more interesting. But you have never been in the field of primary education, so you don't understand. Meng Ping shook his head and said earnestly, "Novelty is only temporary for these children who don't know anything. You can maintain it for a day, 2 days, or even a month, but after a month, they will still be bored. Children like to move around, especially the children in the mountains who rarely sit down quietly to do something. Without a teacher urging them, forcing them, and reminding them, do you think they will obediently sit still and listen to the lesson? That's impossible," Meng Ping said. Poplar Fruit didn't interrupt his long-winded speech, but from the corner of his eye, he saw Xiong Kahu with his hands behind his back, silently sneaking behind Meng Ping and listening attentively. Meng Ping spoke for a long time, and finally concluded with one sentence, which was that Poplar Fruit's long-distance education was nonsense. Without waiting for Poplar Fruit to reply, Xiong Kahu rolled his eyes and said loudly, "Little Meng, it's easy for you to say that. If you have the ability, find a teacher for this old man to teach these children." Meng Ping turned around and hurriedly greeted Xiong Kahu. He dared to shout at anyone, but he still had a little respect for Xiong Kahu. Xiong Kahu was of the same generation as his father, and used to be a guest in their house. Meng Ping gritted his teeth and said, "Find one, I will definitely find one for you. Now that I am the director of the Lidong Education Bureau, I will be responsible for the children of Xiong Village. In a few months, I will definitely find a teacher to teach them. Come on. You." Xiong Kahu chuckled and said without giving him any face, "At that time, Teacher Meng went to the city's education bureau many times, but there was nothing he could do. You're just a small bureau chief, so how can you be so arrogant? I will find it. Lidong County's situation is a little bad now, but I believe it won't continue to be this bad." Meng Ping was still an idealist. He was unconvinced. "Then tell me, how many months do you want me to wait? Give me a definite time." Xiong Kahu raised his eyelids and looked at Meng Ping's speechless expression. Then, he sneered and said, "Forget it. Don't make me wait for another 2 years and delay the children before you say that you can't do it." Seeing Meng Ping's face turn red, Poplar Fruit patted his shoulder to make him relax. Then he smiled and said, "Big brother Meng, we don't have a better method right now, right? So, whether it's traditional education or online education, as long as the children can read books and solve their urgent needs, it's a good idea, don't you think so?" Poplar Fruit's words are reasonable. Xiong Kahu clapped his hands and said, "I don't know what the long-distance education is about, but I can see that Poplar Fruit is investing so much in finding a way out for the children. And I can also see that the children love the lessons he teaches. That's enough. Don't lie to me, I don't believe it. Master, don't lose your temper. Don't say too much." Poplar Fruit felt that he was adding fuel to the fire, so he quickly stopped him. Then, Poplar Fruit turned to Meng Ping and said with a smile, "Uncle Meng, let's not talk about the effect first. Why don't you put aside your prejudice and listen to my ideas and see the actual effect on my side? What do you think?" Meng Ping didn't continue to be stubborn. He went down the stairs and nodded. "Then tell me. The learning motivation I'm talking about is actually a little different from what I introduced to you in the county city." Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "The motivation is divided into driving force and internal driving force. The external driving force is that we will constantly summarize our experience and use some interesting teaching materials, as well as the advantages of the internet and multimedia to let the children find joy in learning and let them like listening to lessons. I don't believe that there are children who like listening to lessons." Meng Ping snorted at Poplar Fruit's words. "These children, if you don't care about them, they will be absent-minded in class or run out to play. Can you control them? Reach out your hand from the computer and press them down on the stool? What do you know? Why wouldn't they like it?" The children listened to Poplar Fruit's stories without blinking. Xiong Kahu jumped out as if his butt was on fire. He pointed at Meng Ping and scolded. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "Uncle Meng, you see, you are being paranoid again. Listen to me first. I will talk about your problem later on." Poplar Fruit said, "Then let's talk about internal driving force." Internal driving force refers to the fact that people have a lot of needs. In order to satisfy these needs, they will work hard to do things that they might not like. First of all, we will consciously let them understand that learning is the best way for them to walk out of the mountains and live a good life. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "This is not brainwashing, it is just like that. The specific method is not to tell them this, but to let them see the outside world. There are many promotional videos or documentaries on the internet that are actually quite good. I believe that when they understand how big the outside world is, they will want to study hard and strive to walk out of the mountains one day and explore the world." Meng Ping admitted that Poplar Fruit's words made sense. In fact, he knew the thoughts of the teachers in the county city, including himself. They all believed that the most important task of a teacher in class was to teach well and let the students do well. For this goal, they would rather use the cramming method of education or engage parents to teach instead of spending more time to understand the psychological needs of the children. Wasn't there such a joke? One had to study hard in primary school. Why? Because during the quiz, one had to get into a good junior high school. One had to study hard in junior high school. Why? Because during the middle school exams, one had to get into a good senior high school. One had to study hard in senior high school. Why? Because during the college entrance exams, one had to get into a good university. One had to study hard in university. Why? Because if one studied hard, one would be able to find a good job when they walked out of society. However, after finding a good job, one would be scolded by the boss every day. "You pig brain, did you study hard all day in school until you became stupid? Hehe, is it my fault?" Chapter 629. There's also the internal drive. Poplar Fruit smiled. "I think that there's a need to set up a reward system." "Reward system?" Meng Ping jumped up and said in disgust, "Do you want education to be as utilitarian as society?" Poplar Fruit was stunned. He felt that this question was a little difficult to answer. Although there was indeed some competition, it seemed that calling it utilitarian was a little too much. "I look down on those schools the most. They would give out tens of thousands of yuan as a reward to the top scorer of the college entrance examination," Meng Ping said in disdain. "There's nothing wrong with the reward, but to compete with each other and even use the reward to attract students, they might as well turn the school into a vanity fair." Poplar Fruit smiled. "Uncle Meng, look, you're getting excited again. I didn't say that I wanted to set up a cash reward. Of course, money is indeed a good incentive for the children of Hong Village who have a hard time living now." Poplar Fruit shook his head and said, "But I think that rather than giving them cash rewards to spend, it's better to give them a chance to expand their horizons. It's better to teach a man how to fish than to give him a fish. The logic is the same." Poplar Fruit smiled. "I plan to do it this way. Every day, the performance of the children in class and the completion of their homework will be tabulated. At the end of the term, they will be graded. It's a little like university, where the average, midterm, and final exam scores will be divided into percentages and the total score will be calculated into a ranking. Why is it so troublesome? Don't the exam scores speak for themselves? Whether or not they are serious in class, whether or not they are diligent in their homework, these can all be seen." Meng Ping couldn't help but interrupt Poplar Fruit's words. Poplar Fruit could only explain to him, it's different. Some children are talented and intelligent. They don't need to pay attention in class to get high marks. If it's completely based on the midterm and final exam scores, it's very unfair to the students who are usually serious. What's unfair about it? You usually perform well, but in the end, you still can't do well in the exam. What's the use? Meng Ping was puzzled by Poplar Fruit's idea. Look, Uncle Meng, you just said that you were against utilitarian education. Now you're talking about results again. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, plus the usual performance points, it's because the learning process and the results are equally important. Also, I don't want the children to think that their future is hopeless if their grades are not good. Besides, we will adjust the content of the class according to the situation. In particular, we will add courses such as interest classes for them so that they can rely on their own interests to learn some knowledge that interests them in addition to the textbook knowledge. Poplar Fruit said, for example, for those who like literature, we will have elective courses like lecture room and literature appreciation. For those who like martial arts, we will also set up some similar courses. New education? Meng Ping's interest was piqued, but he frowned and said, isn't this making a mountain out of a molehill? Indeed, setting up so many different classes for 300 children always gave people the feeling of using a cannon to kill mosquitoes. This is just a hypothesis. Poplar Fruit smiled. He was a little distracted by Meng Ping and said, back to the topic just now, we will use the final results of the semester to rank them. Then, we will choose the top 10 of each grade and provide them with a chance to go out of the mountains and see the outside world. This is what I have always wanted to do. Our volunteer teachers don't just end the class after it ends. Usually, they will often communicate with the children to understand their psychological state. Then, during the winter and summer holidays, we will bring these volunteers to the mountains and communicate with the children face to face. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, at this time, the money saved from the usual long-distance education will come in handy. Then, we will let them bring 60 children out and bring them to the city, the provincial capital in the mountains, or the more prosperous Yangcheng. These are all possible. Usually, the teachers will bring the students out to play, and they will also organize some interesting activities and games. During this period, they will personally experience the life in the city and the world that they could only understand through their imagination. Poplar Fruit said, then, the next step is more important. When these children go back, they will introduce what they have seen and heard to the other children. I believe that in this process, other children will be envious and work harder to learn, fighting for the next chance to go out of the mountains. A single spark is enough to start a prairie fire, Poplar Fruit said confidently. What's more, what we give them is not a single spark, but a burning torch. While Meng Ping was still pondering and digesting the content of Poplar Fruit's words, Poplar Fruit continued. He stretched out 2 fingers and said, then, it's the management of the student. Uncle Meng, what you said actually makes sense. Poplar Fruit said with a smile, without a teacher by their side, I can't guarantee that the children will sit obediently on the chairs and listen to the lesson even if there is an external force and an internal force. So, in order to solve this problem, we will also set up a head teacher. Poplar Fruit said, this head teacher doesn't need to be responsible for the teaching content. His responsibility is to manage our machines, and then care about and supervise the children's learning. 1. Or 1 for each class. Meng Ping didn't hear clearly. 1. Poplar Fruit said with a smile, 300 children are under his care. He doesn't need to disturb the teachers in the classroom, but he will patrol the 6 grades during the lesson and supervise the particularly disobedient children to sit obediently in their seats and listen to the lesson. Isn't that too little? 300 people. Meng Ping didn't believe that one person could take care of all of them. Yes, Poplar Fruit said, we will also have a class monitor to help manage the class order. Also, the children that are difficult to teach are the minority. Most of the children will listen carefully in class. Then what about your homework? Meng Ping asked with confusion. You can't send it all back for the teacher to change, right? I think our homework model might be different from the current school. Poplar Fruit scratched his head and said, it will mainly be online homework that will be done on the computer. But this is only an idea. The software hasn't been designed yet, so I can't demonstrate it to you. Doing homework on the computer wasn't an easy goal to achieve. Because for mathematics, multiple choice and fill-in-the-blank questions could be answered with a mouse and keyboard, but what if there was a short answer question? You can't use a mouse to draw or write, right? Without other software to use, Fat Dragon had to do his own research and design software that matched Poplar Fruit's ideas. Fat Dragon was an expert, but he wasn't Doraemon. He wasn't someone that Poplar Fruit could casually take out from his pocket. Even so, Poplar Fruit still patiently explained to Meng Ping to reluctantly accept his idea of remote education. Chapter 630. Why did he spend so much effort to convince Meng Ping? Why did he accompany Meng Ping to inspect the stockade at this busiest time? Poplar Fruit, of course, had something to ask of him. Poplar Fruit brought Meng Ping to the main circuit control office in the stockade and said, "Look, Uncle Meng, if we want to carry out this plan, it's not enough for me to donate money and computers alone. I told you before that the voltage in the stockade is low and unstable." Poplar Fruit said, "It's mainly because we don't have enough wires outside, so we need at least 2 more high-voltage wires. It used to be enough because everyone didn't use much electricity. Usually, we just turned on the lights and didn't even have a refrigerator." Poplar Fruit said, "But now it's not enough. Once we turn on more than 300 computers, the electricity consumption will increase exponentially. I'm afraid it won't be able to handle the load." Meng Ping nodded slightly, but didn't say anything. "There's also the problem of the internet." Poplar Fruit said, "You're one of us, so I won't hide it from you. To be honest, we can only access the internet in the village now because my friend used a satellite dish to convert it into a signal amplifier. He captured the network signal from the signal tower on the national highway at the foot of the mountain. Although I also used my own account to log in, it's still somewhat illegal. Uncle Meng, look, there aren't so many corrupt officials in the county now. Can you help me find some connections and ask the Power Supply Bureau and the Telecommunications Bureau to help build these infrastructure as soon as possible?" Poplar Fruit said, "As for the electricity, there's already a high-voltage wire tower. It's easy to add 2 more wires." Meng Ping patted Poplar Fruit's shoulder and said, "Poplar Fruit, you're the most sincere person I've ever met. Although I'm still not very optimistic about your long-distance education, don't worry, I promise you that I'll definitely help you implement it." Meng Ping was also a man of his word. If he promised something, he would definitely do his best to help you. "Hey, Poplar Fruit is here." Someone walked over. His huge body completely blocked out the sunlight, and all of a sudden, it felt like the sky had turned dark. Hearing this simple and honest voice, Poplar Fruit knew that it was Xiong San. However, Meng Ping was startled by Xiong San. When he turned around, he saw a huge man standing behind him. Meng Ping, who had never seen such a tall man in Lidong, was so scared that he almost fell to the ground. Poplar Fruit hurriedly supported him and said to Xiong San with some blame, "Big brother Xiong San, why did you suddenly appear?" "There's no sound." Xiong San scratched his head and said, "I wanted to arm wrestle with you, but I didn't see you the whole morning." "You are also from the Xiong clan?" Meng Ping took a deep breath and asked curiously. Even if it was in the mountains, Meng Ping did not think that anyone could grow to more than 2 meters tall. After all, the genes were there. "No, Uncle Meng, you misunderstood. This is my friend from Yangcheng, a soldier. It just so happened that he was on holiday, so he came over to take a look." Poplar Fruit smiled and introduced, "Big brother Xiong San, this is Meng Ping, Uncle Meng. This is the director of Lidong County's Education Bureau." "Hello." Xiong San was very nice and took the initiative to extend his hand. "Hello." Meng Ping looked at Xiong San's fan-sized palm and felt a little weak. He hesitated for a moment before he shakily placed his little hand in Xiong San's palm. Xiong San shook his hand twice. Withdrawing his hand, Meng Ping let out a sigh of relief. Just a moment ago, he was worried that his hand would be crushed by this huge man. However, Xiong San controlled his strength very well. It was neither too big nor too small. It was just enough to let Meng Ping feel his passion without hurting him. "Xiong San, if you want to arm wrestle, I don't have time right now." Poplar Fruit looked at Meng Ping beside him and said to Xiong San with some embarrassment, I know, I have to accompany a guest. Xiong-san laughed, causing Meng Ping's eardrums to swell. It's okay, we'll talk about it when I have time. I don't have anything to accompany, I've already seen and asked all the questions. Meng Ping suddenly said, Poplar Fruit, you go play, no need to entertain me. Oh right, aren't you going to arm wrestle? I also want to take a look. Meng Ping was smiling faintly, but his eyes were dancing with a smile. That's right, Meng Ping was black-bellied. When he heard arm wrestle, he looked at Xiong-san's terrifying muscles and palms and then looked at Poplar Fruit's well-proportioned physique. He didn't think that Poplar Fruit could arm wrestle with Xiong-san. Okay. Xiong-san grinned and said, then let's go. Xiong-san walked up and squeezed in between Meng Ping and Poplar Fruit. His two thick arms hugged Meng Ping and Poplar Fruit as they walked forward. When they arrived at the training field, before they even entered, a person came out from the ancestral hall. It was Cai Simin. He ran over to Poplar Fruit and said, Boss, there's something I want to tell you. Zhang Yujie asked him to call Poplar Fruit boss, and Cai Simin really did it, regardless of whether Poplar Fruit liked the title or not. Poplar Fruit said helplessly, How many times have I told you not to call me boss? I don't pay you. What's the matter? Our table is unreasonable. Cai Simin gestured and said, It's so big, after putting in the screen, it can't fit anything else. Poplar Fruit knew that at that time, Fat Dragon used 2 tables to put together. It has to be widened. Cai Simin gestured and said, It has to be at least twice as big. That way, it will be more comfortable to type on the keyboard, and it will also protect the eyes. My suggestion is to have it custom-made. Cai Simin spoke quickly, Isn't our keyboard very thick? Then make a concave hole so that it can fit in, so that the children can have a good posture when typing. Also, the place where the screen is placed has to be screwed to reinforce the screen. Otherwise, if you touch the table, the screen will fall down and break. How can that work? Poplar Fruit smiled and said, Yes, your suggestion is good. You discuss with Fat Dragon and make a simple design. Then, I'll show it to Uncle He tonight. When they arrived at the training field, Xiong-san and Poplar Fruit found a stone plate and sat down facing each other. Seeing that there was a good show to watch, many of the children from Xiong village gathered around noisily. I want to wash away my shame, Xiong-san said honestly. Come. Poplar Fruit smiled. Rolling up his sleeves, one black and one white arm contrasted sharply on the stone plate. What was even more striking was the disproportionate thickness of the muscles. There was no referee. After the two of them signaled each other with their eyes, they began arm wrestling. It's getting bigger, a child who wasn't even 10 years old exclaimed as he pointed at Poplar Fruit's arm. It was a change that could be seen with the naked eye. When Poplar Fruit used all his strength, his arm actually swelled up, causing his sleeves to tighten. Hey, hey, hey! Xiong-san exerted all his strength. His strength was enough to lift an adult bull, but in front of Poplar Fruit, he was still lacking by a little. Poplar Fruit was also exerting all his strength, but he didn't need to shout or hold it in until his face turned red. Under this shocking contrast, Poplar Fruit slowly twisted Xiong-san's wrist onto the stone plate. Meng Ping couldn't believe his eyes. He had a surprised look on his face. He didn't look as calm as when he wanted to see Poplar Fruit make a fool of himself. A thought flashed through his mind, could it be that this big guy is a soft-footed shrimp? Those muscles are a lie, right? Chapter 631. He Wanjua, Meng Sanhua, and the other soldiers from the Special Forces gave up their comfortable vacation and came all the way to Gui Mountain. They were not just here to see Poplar Fruit and listen to Xiongkahu talk about the past. Back then, Xiongkahu's illustrious battle achievements could be said to be a legend in the history of our military. He Wanjua and the others really wanted to see for themselves just what kind of skills the legendary old master Xiongkahu had. In the end, on the night they came, all of them were drunk. When they woke up the next day, they saw old master Xiongkahu's white-haired appearance and how he walked with a trembling gait. They were a little embarrassed to voice their request. Yin Liuqing asked the other people in the Hong village. It was said that among Xiongkahu's disciples, the most powerful one was called Xiong Jisha. Along the way, Yin Liuqing found that Xiong Jisha was the young man who had practiced swordsmanship with poplar fruit in the morning. Xiong Jisha's swordsmanship was not bad among ordinary people, but in the eyes of these experienced soldiers, it was still not enough to be a master. Yin Liuqing regretted that he did not find Xiong Jisha to practice with. He could only walk around the village to see if he could meet someone as powerful as the Shaolin Temple sweeping monk. The next day, He Wanjua took them for a run around the village. They happened to see Xiong Kehu and Poplar Fruit come back from practicing swordsmanship on the mountain. Yin Liuqing's eyes lit up. He saw Xiong Kehu with a completely different aura after holding a sword. He walked over excitedly and asked to see Xiong Kehu's swordsmanship. "I'm from Tsangzhou." Yin Liuqing saw Xiong Kehu looking at him, so he bowed and said, "It's my family's swordsmanship." Xiong Kehu looked at Yin Liuqing and asked, "Your surname is Yin?" "Yin Zhentai's descendant. He's my great-grandfather." "Have you seen him before?" Yin Liuqing was shocked. He did not expect that an old man who lived in the mountains all year round would know so much about the outside world. Master Yin Zhentai was known as the #1 swordsman in North China. Unfortunately, he did not escape the bullets of the Japanese. Xiong Kehu shook his head and said, "I've never seen him. When I was born, Master Yin was already dead." Master Yin's swordsmanship was passed down by the swordsmen who roamed the world. "I've admired him for a long time." "You're his descendant. That's great." Xiong Kehu laughed and said, "You can compete with Poplar Fruit. I want to see if Master Yin's swordsmanship is better or my Miaodao." "Yang Guo." Yin Liuqing hesitantly looked at Yang Guo. Use swordsmanship. Xiong Kehu's name was Xiong. However, if she were to fight with Yang Guo, Yin Liuqing felt that she had an unfair advantage, and she could not see the true level of Miaodao. Xiong Kehu saw that Xiong Kehu did not believe in poplar fruit and was amused. "What? You're looking down on poplar fruit? Poplar fruit is 70% as good as me. You can practice with him first. If you're not satisfied, we can help each other." "Okay." Xiong Kehu nodded. He didn't even run anymore, looking like he was eager to give it a try. He Wanjua was not that unreasonable. Since they were not in the army, he disbanded the running team to satisfy these guys' desire to watch the show. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "Wait. I'll go back and wake Kiki up." Looking at the time, Kiki was about to get up. Without anyone to look after her, Poplar Fruit was worried. Yin Liuqing also had to go back to get his swordsmanship, so everyone agreed to meet at the training field in half an hour. Kiki was quite obedient when she woke up today. She squinted her eyes and smiled as she helped her father change her clothes. "Come, open your mouth. Daddy will brush your teeth for you." Poplar Fruit pinched his daughter's chubby cheeks and held a small cup for her to drink and spit out. Kiki opened her mouth and giggled. "Open your mouth. Now is not the time to say pinyin." Poplar Fruit patted Kiki's little butt and smiled. "Daddy is going to compete with Uncle Liu Qing in swordsmanship later. You won't be able to play if you're late." Kiki opened her mouth obediently. She bit on the small toothbrush her father gave her and said vaguely, Then, Kiki, can I go and play?" "Kiki can't play with swords, but you can go and watch." Poplar Fruit took out the toothbrush and smiled. Yes, Kiki wants to watch." Kiki was very happy. She jumped up and hugged her father, smearing the toothpaste foam all over her father's neck. After washing her face and combing her hair, Poplar Fruit tied his daughter's hair into a beautiful flower bun. The current Poplar Fruit was already very familiar with braids and hairstyles that were not very complicated. The flower bun was to tie the long hair that was hanging down into a bud-shaped bun on the top of the head. This way, the hair that was hanging down would only be the length of bangs and would not be draped loosely behind the back. This hairstyle was a little cute, but it was definitely not as good-looking as a ponytail or braid. However, the advantage was that it was cooler in this hot summer. When Poplar Fruit was bathing Kiki yesterday, he saw that Kiki's back had a little heat rash. He discussed it with Fong Beibei and decided to change Kiki's hairstyle into a more comfortable one. "Oh, my head is so heavy." Kiki looked at herself in the mirror with her new hairstyle. She also felt that it was funny. She took her father's hand and walked around the bed exaggeratedly, acting very unhappy. "Okay, Let's go, it's almost time. Poplar Fruit put on his daughter's small shoes, picked up his 2 Meowdow with his right hand, and said with a smile, "I'll help Papa take it." Kiki was very active. After being helped down from the bed by her father with one hand, she jumped up and down and pulled the tail of the Meowdow scabbard. She raised her little butt and wanted to lift it up. Poplar Fruit put away the Meowdow, then pulled Kiki up and said with a smile, "Dad can take it himself." Poplar Fruit took the milk bottle that had just cooled down from the table next to him. He hung it around Kiki's neck with a small rope and said, "Kiki will be responsible for drinking milk." Kiki nodded obediently. She held the milk bottle and took a sip. Then she cupped her hands and blocked her father's big hand. She raised her little head, smacked her lips, and said, "Kiki wants to go by herself." Poplar Fruit laughed, waved his hand, and said with a smile, "Let's go." 2 figures, one big and one small, walked out of the room. There was a long figure that followed them to the corridor at the door. It whimpered, wagged its tail, hesitated for a moment, lowered its head, and turned back to the room with its tail between its legs. "Uncle, where are you going?" Just as he went downstairs, Xiong Xiaofeng came out of nowhere with a strand of spider web hanging on his head. He shouted, "Kiki, let's go play together. I want to see Papa's knife dance." Kiki shook her head and said, following her father closely, "It's dancing." "Kiki, your Mandarin is not standard," Xiong Xiaofeng said with some pride. "It's knife dance. This is reading the knife." Kiki was anxious. She pointed to her father's scabbard and said seriously. Then she raised her head and asked her father to be the judge. "Kiki is right. It's indeed a knife. Dancing is another kind." Xiaofeng misunderstood. Poplar Fruit took off the spider web on Xiong Xiaofeng's head, patted him on the head, and said with a smile, "Then I want to see it too." Xiong Xiaofeng jumped up and followed behind. Chapter 632. With 2 followers, Poplar Fruit leisurely came to the martial arts field of the Hong village. He Wonjua and the others had already arrived. They were surrounded by the children of the Hong village. Some of them could not squeeze forward, so they climbed up the high railing. There were very few entertainment activities for the children on the mountain. They were not satisfied with yesterday's excitement. Seeing these soldiers gathered at the martial arts field again, they spread the word of mouth. In just half an hour, almost all the boys had gathered there. Seeing them whispering to each other and waiting for the start of the show, Poplar Fruit felt that these boys were waiting for a movie to be released, and he and Yin Liuqing would put on a big show for them. Not only these children, but also Xiong Jisha and 2 other young people who had not yet started to work in the school gathered together. They stood next to the weapon rack in the martial arts field. Poplar Fruit patted Kiki and asked her to follow Xiong Xiaofeng to Xiong Jisha's side. Poplar Fruit was worried that Kiki would run around and get hurt by the swords. It was safer with Xiong Jisha's help. However, without Poplar Fruit's order, He Wonjua saw so many restless boys around and waved his hand to let Xiong Da, Xiong and Xiong San stand in front of those boys to prevent them from accidentally running into the middle of the field. Xiong Da and Xiong San were too strong, so they attracted most of the attention. A few fearless boys even ran to Xiong San to compare their height, but found that they were not even as tall as Xiong San's knees. Poplar Fruit walked to his master's side. Yin Liuqing had already taken out his padao and was wiping the shiny blade with a rough towel. The padao looked a bit like a broadsword, but it was longer than a broadsword and looked more simple. It was one of the most common weapons carried by chivalrous heroes in Jianghu, which reflected the practicality of the padao to some extent. "How do we compete? Do we decide the winner in one round?" Poplar Fruit took out the key and asked while unlocking the scabbard. "Let's decide it in one round," Yin Liuqing said confidently. He didn't want to waste too much time on Poplar Fruit. "Padaos have different lengths," Xiong Kahu suddenly interrupted and said, "Let's compete in 2 rounds so that we can see the result." Yin Liuqing was stunned for a moment before nodding his head. He didn't mind, but he thought that Xiong Kahu was worried that Poplar Fruit would make a fool of himself and wanted to increase his chances of winning. Poplar Fruit didn't mind either. To have the opportunity to see more of the kung fu of other sects was something to be happy about. Yin Liuqing arrived early, so he stood in the middle of the field. His posture was very standard, completely the posture of a soldier. His back was straight, and from the back of his head to his heels, he formed a straight line. He held his saber in his left hand and held it behind his back, waiting for Poplar Fruit to come over. Poplar Fruit, you'll be the first one. Single blade. Xiong Kahu waved his hand and instructed. Poplar Fruit was stunned for a moment, but he still followed the order and stuck the Miaodao in his left hand into the ground. Then, he cupped his fists and walked into the field. Before Poplar Fruit turned around, Yin Liuqing looked at Poplar Fruit with a little sympathy. He thought to himself, maybe Poplar Fruit's dual saber skills haven't reached perfection yet. Old Xiong wouldn't let him make a fool of himself with dual sabers. Yin Liuqing then thought of the previous practice between Poplar Fruit and Xiong Jisha, which was also single blade. He was even more certain of his guess. He secretly planned to go easy on Poplar Fruit. Meng Sanhua was bored standing on the side. All his attention was on Poplar Fruit and Yin Liuqing. He didn't have the time to maintain order with He Wenjue and the others. After seeing Poplar Fruit throw down a Miaodao, Meng Sanhua excitedly ran over to pick it up, wanting to weigh it in his hand. Meng Sanhua almost sprained his waist when he tried to pick it up. It wasn't that the Miaodao was so heavy that he couldn't lift it. It was just that it was very different from what he had expected. He had thought that even if the Miaodao was heavy, it would only be 2 or 3 kilograms. But Poplar Fruit's Miaodao was as heavy as an AK-47. One had to know that an AK-47 could only be used with 2 hands in combat. If the Miaodao was so heavy, how was one supposed to use it? Unlike a gun that could be fired immediately after being picked up, a Miaodao should be designed with more emphasis on flexibility. Meng Sanhua already felt that the Miaodao was a bit of a hindrance. If he were to fight someone else, he would probably be killed before he could even pull it out. Is there only one way to split a mountain? Meng Sanhua was puzzled. The competition had already begun. Yin Liuqing and Poplar Fruit came into contact. In the beginning, both of their movements were slow. The tips of their blades clashed for a moment before moving away. They were testing each other, trying to figure out each other's strengths. After all, this wasn't a battlefield. There was no need to fight to the death right from the start. It was a good thing that they knew when to stop when they were ahead. Otherwise, if they used too much force and the opponent couldn't dodge, there would be blood. One had to know that both of them were using real sharpened blade. A heavy blade without a sharp edge meant that a heavy blade without a sharp edge could hurt someone. Even though it was just a short clash, Yin Liuqing's expression changed. He felt a strong force coming from the blade. He didn't feel it clearly the first time, but the second time, Yin Liuqing realized that it wasn't an illusion. Poplar Fruit's blade was indeed very strong. But why did he feel that Poplar Fruit's agility with the blade was no less than his? What was going on? There was no time to figure out the answer to this question. After the two of them tested each other, they entered an increasingly fierce fight. In terms of technique, the Padao wasn't inferior to the 24 Miaodao forms. It was born out of the famous Cha Quan. Like Cha Quan, it focused on nimble steps, strong rhythm, relaxed posture, and rapid force. The Padao only had a few moves: chop, stomp, sweep, block, and twist. But it was better in its agility and infinite changes, making it impossible to guard against. Yin Liuqing chopped, swept, and flicked his blade. His body moved left and right. He quickly struck 3 times from the top, middle, and bottom. Although he avoided the vital parts and held back some of his strength, the blade's shadow was like a strange spirit snake. It appeared in front of him before he could notice it. Clang, clang, clang. Poplar Fruit reacted quickly. He held the blade in one hand and the back of the blade in the other. He quickly blocked 3 times and dodged Yin Liuqing's series of attacks. At this time, the children watching the fight were just starting to exclaim. His reaction was very fast. Yin Liuqing's mind flashed through several scenes of Poplar Fruit winning against Meng Sanhua. It seemed that he won by relying on his faster reaction than Meng Sanhua. Unfortunately, it wasn't just a competition of reaction speed. No matter how fast your reaction speed is, it's not as fast as my speed. Yin Liuqing swung his blade and was blocked by Poplar Fruit. Then he jumped up like a monkey and flashed to Poplar Fruit's right side. He stretched his body and swung his blade again. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.